You've been told that peace comes from fixing your life, from healing your past, from becoming the best version of yourself. But if that were true, why do you still feel unsettled? Why do quiet moments feel loud? Why does your mind race when all you want is rest? The truth is, peace isn't something you earn. It's not at the end of your to-do list. It's not hidden in a better version of you. Real peace, the kind that sinks into your bones, comes from letting go, not from having more, but from needing less, not from chasing, but from stopping, from stillness, from seeing clearly. And for over 2,500 years, Buddhist wisdom has held the path. Not a religion, not a rule book, a quiet invitation to come home to yourself, to stop believing every thought, to stop carrying what was never yours, to stop chasing a version of life that only makes you tired. Tonight, something shifts. As you listen to these lessons, your breath will slow, the noise in your head will soften, and a deep calm, the kind you forgot existed, will begin to rise. You'll remember that you are not broken. You never were. You were just too busy trying to be something else. This isn't just a way to fall asleep. It's a way to wake up to the peace that's been waiting inside you all along. Are you ready? Let's begin. You've been told that peace comes from fixing your life, from healing your past, from becoming the best version of yourself. But if that were true, why do you still feel unsettled? Why do quiet moments feel loud? Why does your mind race when all you want is rest? The truth is, peace isn't something you earn. It's not at the end of your to-do list. It's not hidden in a better version of you. Real peace, the kind that sinks into your bones, comes from letting go. Not from having more, but from needing less. Not from chasing, but from stopping. From stillness, from seeing clearly. And for over 2,500 years, Buddhist wisdom has held the path. Not a religion, not a rule book. A quiet invitation to come home to yourself, to stop believing every thought, to stop carrying what was never yours, to stop chasing a version of life that only makes you tired. Tonight, something shifts. As you listen to these lessons, your breath will slow, the noise in your head will soften, and a deep calm, the kind you forgot existed, will begin to rise. You'll remember that you are not broken. You never were. You were just too busy trying to be something else. This isn't just a way to fall asleep. It's a way to wake up to the peace that's been waiting inside you all along. Are you ready? Let's begin. You've been carrying a story, maybe without realizing it. A quiet script running beneath your thoughts, shaping every moment, every decision. It tells you who you are, what you're worth, what you deserve. It says you're this kind of person. You've made these mistakes, you've had these victories, and from all of that, it builds a picture. This is you. But what if that story isn't true? What if the part of you that feels not good enough isn't really you? What if the version of you that's been trying to prove something, fix something, control something, was just a voice in your head? The Buddhists call this voice the illusion of self. Not because you're a ghost or nothing at all, but because what we cling to as me, the image, the narrative, the identity, is always changing. And anything that changes isn't solid, isn't permanent, isn't ultimately you. Look at your life. You've changed. Who you were 5 years ago isn't who you are today. Your fears changed, your goals changed, even your opinions, your style, your dreams. So why do we hold so tightly to "I am this" and "I am not that"? Because it feels safe. The story gives us something to hold, a label to lean on. Even if it hurts, it feels familiar. I'm anxious. I'm too emotional. I'm strong. I'm broken. These stories aren't truth. They're habits, and habits can be unlearned. Buddhist wisdom points to this simple but radical truth. There is no fixed self. You are a process, not a product. A flowing experience, not a frozen definition. What you call me is a collection of thoughts, memories, habits, roles. Like ingredients in a soup, they combine to create something. But no one ingredient is the whole thing. So if you remove the label, who are you? Not nothing, but not someone who needs to be constantly judged, compared, validated, or defended. You're not your job, not your failures, not your trauma, not your success, not your body, not even your thoughts. All of those things arise and pass. They appear in you, but they are not you. This is the core of anatta, the Buddhist teaching of non-self. It's not about erasing yourself. It's about seeing that what you've taken to be yourself was never solid to begin with. You are like the sky, open, spacious, and your thoughts, emotions, and stories are just clouds passing through. When you stop clinging to the clouds, you rediscover the sky. And in that space, something beautiful happens. The pressure lifts. You don't need to keep proving yourself. You don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to worry if people understand you, approve of you, accept you. Because you're not trying to hold a perfect image anymore. You're just here, breathing, living, being. So much of our suffering comes from the need to defend the story. If someone criticizes you, you feel attacked. But if you don't cling to a fixed me, there's nothing to defend. Their words float by. They don't land. If you make a mistake, you don't spiral into shame. It's just an action, not an identity. If someone else succeeds, you don't feel like you've failed. Their path doesn't threaten yours, because you're not in a race to prove your value. Letting go of identity doesn't make you passive. It makes you present. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of defend. You learn instead of resist. You don't have to be a certain kind of person anymore. You just have to be here. Think about how many roles you carry: worker, parent, partner, friend. Those roles are useful, but they're not you. You wear them like clothes, and when the time comes, you can take them off. But many of us forget. We think the clothes are our skin. We think our role is our worth. That's why it hurts so much when a relationship ends, or a job is lost, or we grow older. We believe part of us is dying. But what's really happening is that a role is changing. And that's okay. The river flows. That's what rivers do. And you are the river. Anatta teaches us to loosen our grip, not to give up, not to become numb, but to release the tension in our chest that says, I have to hold everything together. You don't. Life flows on its own. You don't need to push it. You just need to show up for it, honestly. You may feel resistance to this. You may think, but I need an identity. I need to be somebody. That's the conditioning talking. That's the fear of being nothing. But here's what's real. When you let go of trying to be somebody, you don't become nothing. You become free. You're still you, but lighter, more open, more alive. This is not philosophy. This is practice. It's seeing how much your mood changes when you hear a compliment or an insult. It's watching how tight your chest gets when someone disagrees with you. It's noticing the story behind your pain. They hurt me because I'm not good enough. I failed because I'm weak. These are thoughts, not truths. In meditation, you watch those thoughts arise. You don't push them away. You don't fight them. You see them, and slowly they lose their grip. You realize these thoughts are not me. They are just passing through. This is the path to peace. You stop trying to be perfect. You stop needing to be understood all the time. You let go of the urge to control every outcome. And in that stillness, you meet something deeper than identity. You meet awareness itself. Not your story, your essence, the part of you that watches, the silence beneath the noise. From that silence, compassion grows. Because you're no longer so focused on protecting your own story, you can finally hear someone else's. You can listen without reacting. You can care without clinging. You can give without losing yourself. Because the self you thought you were, it's not something you can lose. It's something you never really needed. This is not a theory to believe. It's a truth you feel when the mind slows down and the stories fade. When you stop grasping for who you think you are, peace enters like a soft breeze. You realize there's nothing to fix, nothing to earn, nothing to hold on to, just this breath, just this moment. And that's enough. Letting go of identity doesn't mean abandoning yourself. It means meeting yourself more clearly. Not as an idea, but as a living, breathing awareness that flows with life instead of fighting it. You don't have to be strong all the time, or smart, or perfect, or anything other than present. The peace you're looking for isn't found in becoming someone better. It's found in remembering that you were never trapped to begin with. You just forgot that you're the sky, not the clouds, the witness, not the worry, the open space, not the small story. And as this truth settles in, gently, wordlessly, you begin to rest. Not because everything is fixed, but because you no longer need it to be. Sleep can come now, not as an escape, but as a return to stillness, to softness, to peace. Let go. You're free. And so we breathe. The tension of identity has softened. The story has loosened its grip. You've tasted the quiet freedom of being no one in particular. But now a question rises. How do you live from this space without falling back into the trap? How do you walk through life without slipping into old patterns of fixing, proving, improving? Because even after seeing that the self is not solid, the habit to perfect it still clings. The world tells you to be more confident, more productive, more healed, more spiritual. But what if the problem isn't that you aren't enough? What if the problem is believing you need to be anything other than exactly what you are right now? There's a path for this, one that doesn't demand you change to be worthy of peace, but instead reveals peace within the truth of your own experience. It's ancient, simple, and often misunderstood. The Four Noble Truths. They don't require belief. They're not rules. They are an invitation to see clearly, to stop spinning in confusion, and most importantly, to accept what is without running, fixing, or hiding. The first noble truth says, there is suffering, not as punishment, not as failure, but as a fact. No need to resist it or dress it up. Suffering exists. In big ways, loss, grief, illness, and in small, quiet ways, restlessness, shame, loneliness, comparison. When you stop pretending you're supposed to be free from discomfort, something radical happens. You stop judging it. You stop layering shame on top of pain. You stop making yourself wrong for having human emotions. Suffering becomes a shared truth, not a personal flaw. This is where self-acceptance begins, not with changing yourself, but with meeting your experience as it is, without defense, without edits, without pretending. The second noble truth says, suffering has a cause. It's not random. It's not a curse. It comes from craving, tanha, the thirst for things to be different than they are. The mind reaches. It reaches for praise, for pleasure, for success. It reaches to avoid pain, boredom, rejection. This reaching is not evil. It's simply what minds do. But every time it reaches, it leaves the present. It abandons now, and that abandonment hurts. Craving creates a split. One part of you is here, and another part is chasing an ideal. You become a stranger to your own moment. The craving says, I'll accept myself when I'm better. I'll relax when I'm healed. I'll love myself when I've fixed all the flaws. But peace is never in the future. It's always now, which means radical acceptance can only happen here, within the truth of what is, not what should be. The third noble truth says suffering can end. That thirst doesn't have to control you forever. You're not doomed to chase the next version of yourself endlessly. Peace isn't a reward for fixing everything. It's the result of releasing the chase. But this isn't passive. It's not about giving up or being lazy. It's about finally stopping the inner war. When you believe you must be constantly improving, you turn life into a battleground. Every weakness becomes an enemy. Every imperfection a threat. But when you understand that peace is possible right now, you put down the sword. You stop trying to conquer yourself. You begin to care for yourself, even in the middle of struggle. This is not soft comfort. It is the strength to stand in your own skin without needing to escape it. The fourth noble truth shows the way. The noble eightfold path. Not a checklist, not a punishment. A set of gentle reminders that guide you home, to live wisely, to act with kindness, to think clearly, to cultivate stillness. This is the way out of the prison of self-improvement, not by becoming someone else, but by walking step by step, as you are, into the center of your own life. What makes this path powerful is that it meets you where you are. It doesn't ask you to be more. It asks you to be honest. Right view isn't about having the perfect philosophy. It's about seeing clearly, seeing that chasing peace creates suffering, and that peace arises when chasing stops. Right intention is not about fixing your desires. It's about aligning your heart with truth. Do your intentions come from fear or love, from ego or compassion? This is where you learn to trust what is soft, not what is loud, what is honest, not what is impressive. Right speech becomes a mirror. You notice how often you talk to cover up shame, to prove worth, to defend identity. When you speak less, you hear more. You hear your own longing. You hear the parts of you that are tired from performing. and slowly speech becomes less about image and more about connection. Right action is the practice of embodiment, not trying to be good, but living from wholeness. When you stop chasing a better version of yourself, your actions become cleaner. You help others because you care, not to earn approval. You set boundaries not to protect an ego, but to protect peace. Right. Livelihood becomes a question of harmony. How do you make a living without abandoning your integrity? Not how much money do you earn, but how much of your soul do you spend to earn it? When you stop needing your job to define your worth, you free yourself to live with purpose, not pressure. Right effort is one of the most misunderstood. It doesn't mean pushing harder. It means applying energy with wisdom, not to control life, but to stay with what matters. You learn to recognize when effort becomes force, when doing becomes escaping. Right effort means choosing presence over perfection, again and again. Right. Mindfulness is the anchor. It pulls you out of stories and back into sensation. Instead of trying to be peaceful, you feel the breath. Instead of fixing emotions, you feel them arise and pass. Mindfulness is the practice of returning, not once, but constantly. Returning to now, returning to the only place radical acceptance lives. Right. Concentration is about deepening presence, not clinging to calm, but learning to stay. When the mind wants to escape, you stay. When discomfort comes, you stay. You train the heart to be still, not because the world is perfect, but because you are done running. Together, these 8 aspects are not a ladder to climb. They are a circle, a rhythm, a way of being. You don't master them one by one. You live them softly, honestly, in your own way. Not to earn peace, but because you are tired of resisting it. Radical acceptance begins where the path begins, with seeing clearly. That means you don't have to hide from your pain. You don't have to pretend to be okay. You don't have to explain your worth. You don't have to heal everything before you're allowed to rest. You just have to stop fighting what's already here. The habit to fix yourself is strong. It's rooted in fear. The fear that if you stop trying to improve, you'll fall apart, that you'll be judged, forgotten, unloved. But ask yourself, has endless self-improvement made you peaceful or exhausted? The 4 noble truths don't demand that you transcend your humanity. They invite you to inhabit it, to stop chasing happiness and start understanding suffering, to stop needing to be more and start living with what already is. Acceptance doesn't mean you like everything about your life. It means you stop waiting to love yourself until everything changes. It means you treat your suffering not as a problem, but as a doorway, a teacher, a guide. This path is not about fixing, it's about freeing. You're not asked to become worthy. You're asked to remember that you already are, that the anxiety is not proof of your failure, it's proof that you care, that the sadness is not weakness, it's part of being awake, that the discomfort is not a sign you're broken, it's a sign that something true is stirring. And when you meet yourself here without resistance, something shifts. The endless hunger softens, the harsh voice fades, the need to be someone else quiets. You learn to sit with yourself the way you would sit with a child, gentle, present, honest. You don't demand perfection from the child. You hold space. You listen. You let them feel what they feel. You begin to offer yourself the same. Radical acceptance is not an endpoint. It's a daily practice. It's a commitment to return over and over to the truth of this moment. It's the willingness to let go of the idea that you need to be better before you can feel peace. It's the courage to say, "This is where I am, and this is enough." From that place, you stop striving, not because you've given up, but because you've finally arrived. You are not here to become someone perfect. You are here to wake up to who you already are beneath the layers of judgment. You are not here to escape suffering. You are here to understand it so deeply that it no longer controls you. This is the quiet revolution of the Four Noble Truths. Not a path of becoming, but a path of coming home. And as this truth settles into your bones, your breath changes, your thoughts soften, and a calm, steady presence begins to rise. Not a better version of you, a realer one. No more chasing, no more proving, no more waiting. You are already the one you've been trying to become. You just needed to stop and see it. So rest here. No need to rush to the next chapter. This moment is whole, and so are you. And then it settles. After all the reaching, all the quiet effort to meet life as it is, something deeper begins to rise. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply stands in the stillness you never thought could last. The chase has slowed, but not because you've achieved something new. It's because you've seen the truth in what's already here. Now, a deeper question arises. If nothing is missing, if you are already whole, why does the restlessness remain? Why does the urge to improve, to become, to get somewhere never quite go away? This is where the mind quietly resists. Because letting go of fixing the self is one thing, but letting go of achieving something, even something as sacred as enlightenment or peace, feels harder. It feels like giving up, like wasting potential. But that's not what this is. The concept of no achievement is not failure. It's not passivity. It's not a rejection of growth. It's the dropping of the belief that you need to reach a final state to be worthy of rest. It is the unlearning of the lie that the next version of you will finally make everything okay. The heart of this teaching says, there is nothing to attain. Not because growth isn't real, but because chasing after something outside of now keeps you spinning in suffering. Every time you believe that you need to be further along, you are rejecting the present moment. Every time you think peace is something that comes later, you postpone your own freedom. The striving to be more, even spiritually more, keeps the same illusion alive. It says, you are not enough now, that you are incomplete, that you are a project waiting for final edits. And so, even your spiritual path becomes a performance. You sit in meditation, hoping to feel something profound. You read to become wiser. You speak gently so you can be more awake. But underneath it, the same noise remains, the belief that this moment isn't it, that now is only a stepping stone to something better. That belief is the root of restlessness. Wanting to be awakened is still wanting. Wanting to be enlightened is still clinging. Wanting to be calm, successful, fulfilled, it's still a reaching hand, and every reach takes you out of presence. Every reach reinforces the illusion that you are not already touching what you seek? What if the effort to arrive is what keeps you from arriving? In Zen, they call this no gaining mind, the willingness to sit, to walk, to live with no reward in sight. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've stopped grasping. There is a difference. When you stop chasing outcomes, you don't become lazy. You become free. You cook not to impress. You speak not to be right. You meditate not to feel something special. You live not to get somewhere, but simply to live, fully, unfiltered, awake to what's right here. This is what ends restlessness, not a breakthrough, not an achievement, but the full acceptance that there's nothing to achieve. Even the desire to let go can become a trap, a goal, a test you think you should pass. But letting go happens when you see that holding on isn't necessary anymore. It dissolves on its own, like fog in the sun. The path is not about fixing your flaws until you disappear. It's about seeing that the part of you striving to be better was never flawed to begin with. It was just scared. It thought peace was somewhere else. It thought meaning was in the destination. But meaning is not at the end. It's in the steps, in the way your foot meets the ground, in the breath that enters and leaves, in the silence that holds you when nothing needs to be said. The idea of progress is useful for maps, but for inner stillness, it's often a barrier, because every measurement creates pressure. Every imagined future creates resistance to now, and this resistance is the very thing that breaks your connection to presence. No achievement doesn't mean life stays still. It means you are not chasing your worth anymore. Growth still happens, change still comes, but it's not driven by lack. It flows from clarity, not anxiety. You don't meditate to become someone else. You sit because stillness is beautiful. You don't serve others to earn goodness. You serve because kindness feels like truth. When you stop needing life to reward you for being good, everything shifts. Your kindness becomes cleaner. Your work becomes lighter. Even your rest becomes deeper. Because there's no more waiting for the permission to exhale. So many live like they're being graded, as if life is a test and every moment is a chance to earn or lose points. But there is no scoreboard, no teacher marking your paper, no future version of you standing at the finish line, waiting with approval. There's only this breath, this moment, this truth, that you can be whole without finishing anything. What does it feel like to move through life without striving? Not indifferent, not disengaged, but peacefully rooted in the now. You speak with sincerity, not strategy. You walk with awareness, not urgency. You let go of timelines and allow the natural unfolding of your life to teach you everything you need to know. You begin to see that everything you've been seeking, calm, joy, love, is not something to acquire, it's something to recognize. And recognition doesn't require progress, it requires presence. This is what the great teachers point to when they say there's nowhere to go. The moment you drop the illusion of a finish line, the tension in your chest begins to release. The restlessness no longer has fuel, because the striving that fed it, the idea that peace is just around the corner, has dissolved. In this stillness, action still happens, but it is no longer survival. It is no longer a race. It is no longer tied to an identity in need of proving. You write not to be a writer. You love not to be lovable. You practice not to be awakened. You just live, and that becomes enough. Even the word practice changes meaning. It's no longer rehearsal for a perfect version of you. It becomes a form of presence, a way of remembering, a rhythm that roots you in what is real. When you stop measuring your inner life like a project, you start trusting your life as it is. You trust the silence, even when it's uncomfortable. You trust the slowness, even when it feels like falling behind. You trust that nothing you're doing is wasted, even if it brings no visible reward. This is not easy. Letting go of the idea of achievement goes against everything you've been taught. From childhood, you were praised for performance, rewarded for reaching goals, conditioned to chase the next success. To stop doing that feels dangerous, like disappearing. But what disappears is not you. What disappears is the constant pressure to be more, and what remains is something deeper, truer, a self that is not earned but discovered. This is where peace lives. In the moment you stop asking, "Am I enough yet?" and start living as if the question never needed to be asked. Restlessness doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A tension in the background, a sense that you should be further along, a feeling that you're not quite there. But what if there doesn't exist? What if you are always here? And what if here is not a problem? The more you see this, the more rest becomes natural. You no longer need to be taught how to relax. You just stop interfering with the relaxation that was already possible, like stopping the stirring of water so it can settle on its own. Even your goals soften. You can still dream, but you no longer treat your dreams as proof of your value. You live in alignment, not in effort. You walk your path not because it leads somewhere, but because walking itself is beautiful. This freedom is not the result of years of mastery. It's the result of one clear seeing. There is nothing to attain. And that seeing, once felt deeply, changes how you relate to everything. You stop looking to practice as a way out of your current life and start seeing it as a way deeper into it. You stop waiting to feel worthy and start living from the worth that was always there. You stop hoping to become spiritual and realize you already are, because to be awake is not a future state. It is your nature, uncovered when the striving quiets. This is the joy of no achievement, not boredom, not stagnation, but the quiet joy of a moment unburdened by expectation, the joy of being here for no reason at all, of being alive not to get somewhere, but simply to be. And when this joy becomes familiar, restlessness becomes unfamiliar, not because life becomes easy, but because the part of you that believed you needed to arrive has dissolved. What remains is you, whole, breathing, still. So now you do not need to push forward. You do not need to go back. You do not need to figure it out. You only need to see clearly there is nothing missing, and from that seeing, you can finally rest. Not as a reward, but because you are no longer reaching. Now, peace becomes not a peak, but a presence. Not a prize, but a place you return to with every breath. And that breath is enough. And now that the striving has quieted, a different kind of restlessness begins to reveal itself. It's not loud or dramatic. It's subtle, quiet, but persistent. A thought that doesn't shout, but whispers at the edges of your peace. Someone else is doing better. Even when you've let go of chasing perfection, even when you've stopped needing to achieve something spiritual or external, there can still be a shadow, a quiet habit that looks sideways, measuring, judging, comparing. Even in moments of stillness, there's a part of the mind that checks the room, checks the feed, checks the past, checks the future. It asks, am I enough compared to them? This habit is not personal. It's been trained into us from early life, praised when we stood out, noticed when we were better, ignored when we blended in. It grew roots without us noticing. And now, even as you walk a spiritual path, it walks beside you. Comparison doesn't need attention to survive. It needs your doubt. And for many, that doubt has been there for years. But Buddhist wisdom invites us to see clearly, not just the surface problem, but the mechanism beneath it. Comparison isn't just unpleasant. It's a misunderstanding. It arises when we forget the truth of our own enoughness, when we stop seeing life directly and instead filter it through someone else's reflection. There is a core teaching in the Dharma. Suffering arises from delusion. And one of the deepest delusions is the belief that your value is relative to others, that your peace, your worth, your success must be measured against what someone else has achieved. This is not just a cultural message. It is also a deeply conditioned view of self. When we say they are happier, smarter, further along, we are not just making observations. We are building a false story of lack. That story says, if I don't have what they have, I must be behind. But behind what? What race are we running? Who is keeping score? The Dharma gently reminds us, there is no universal standard for peace. There is only the present moment and your relationship to it. The problem with comparison isn't just that it feels bad. It's that it pulls you out of alignment with your own truth, your own path, your own unfolding. It teaches the mind to chase what was never meant to be yours, to want someone else's joy instead of understanding your own. Buddhism doesn't solve comparison by telling you to be better. It ends comparison by dissolving the self that compares, not in a harsh or nihilistic way, but in a clear and compassionate way. When the self becomes less solid, the habit to protect or elevate it becomes less urgent. You stop needing to win. You stop needing to be seen a certain way. And in that release, you start to touch the freedom of enough. Enough is not a measurement. It's not a number. It's not a threshold you cross one day. Enough is a truth you return to. It is the steady ground beneath the mind that constantly moves. It is what remains when the comparisons fall silent. But to return to enough, you must see the cost of comparison. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. When you compare, you shrink. You forget the fullness of your own experience. You stop living your life and begin performing it, hoping that one day someone will say, you made it. But the Dharma tells the truth. That day doesn't come. The voice you want approval from lives inside you, and it can only be satisfied by turning inward, not outward. The Buddha taught that envy is a form of suffering, not because it's shameful, but because it separates you from others. It builds a wall between you and the world. It says, they have what I don't. I cannot be happy until I have it too. But true joy, mudita, is the ability to celebrate others without losing your own peace. It is the practice of saying, I'm glad they are thriving, while knowing their light doesn't dim yours. This is not easy. It requires a shift in perspective, a breaking of habits. But it begins in the small moments, the way you react to someone else's good news, the way you feel when you scroll through curated lives on screens, the way you instinctively measure your worth in likes, attention, titles, roles. In those moments, you can begin to return, not by resisting the feeling, but by seeing it clearly. This comparison is not truth. It is a conditioned pattern. It is not a reflection of reality. It is a reflection of insecurity. And insecurity, too, is not personal. It is a result of believing that peace must be earned by becoming better, the same misunderstanding that drives all suffering. So we meet comparison the same way we meet craving or fear, with awareness, not judgment. You notice the story forming. You breathe. You do not follow it. You return to now. And in that returning, you begin to see there is nothing lacking here. Contentment arises not when you get what others have, but when you realize you never needed it. You do not need to be as loved as they are. You do not need to be as advanced, as calm, as disciplined, because their path is not your path. Their life is not your curriculum. Each person's unfolding is unique. The Dharma meets each of us differently, depending on our wounds, our conditioning, our karma. And when you start to trust that, you stop grasping for someone else's timeline. You learn to listen inwardly. What do I need now? What is true for me in this moment? Not, what should I be doing? Not, what would make me look better? But, what serves presence? What supports clarity? When you live this way, something beautiful happens. You stop living from deficit. You stop comparing your pace to theirs, and you begin to walk at your own rhythm. A rhythm that doesn't rush, that doesn't prove, that doesn't panic when others surge ahead. This is the freedom of non-comparison. Not because you've achieved more than others, but because you've stepped out of the game. You no longer need to win, because you've remembered there is no race. This remembering doesn't make you passive, it makes you grounded. You still grow, you still evolve. But not from pressure, not from fear, from trust, from joy, from the deep understanding that your life is unfolding exactly as it needs to. Gratitude begins to replace envy. Clarity begins to replace judgment. You stop interpreting someone else's joy as your failure. You stop measuring your reflection by the standards of someone else's mirror. And slowly, the silence grows. The mind, no longer comparing, becomes still. And in that stillness, enoughness is not an idea. It is a felt reality. You begin to feel full, not because you've achieved everything, but because you are no longer seeking to match anyone else. Buddhist teachings do not shame comparison. They reveal it. They shine a light on its root. And that root, always, is the belief that you are separate, that you must compete, that life is limited, and that someone else's gain is your loss. But the truth is abundance, not material abundance, but the inner abundance that knows there is room for all, room for many kinds of joy, many expressions of wisdom, many timelines, many truths. There is no single version of a good life, no universal definition of awakening, no ranking of souls. You are not behind, you are not late, you are not lesser. You are simply here. And here is always enough. To live without comparison is to return home to yourself. Not a smaller version of you, but a fuller one. A version that knows you are not more peaceful when you finally catch up, but when you stop running altogether. Now, the peace you've been searching for doesn't arrive with achievement. It arises with understanding. And understanding deepens when comparison fades. This is the Dharma of enough, not a concept to repeat, but a truth to live. To walk through each day not needing to be better than anyone, but present with what is. To measure not how far you've come, but how closely you're living in alignment with this moment. And if you ever forget, the practice is simple. Return. Come back to now. Come back to breath. Come back to yourself. There's nothing missing. There's no one to become. You are already whole. Not in comparison, but in essence. That's the truth you carry forward now. Quiet, clear, unshaken. Enough. When the noise of comparison fades, something unexpected appears in its place. Not peace immediately, but space. And in that space, a deeper question rises. What have you been filling your life with to avoid hearing what's really there? Even when the outer world is quiet, the mind often isn't. Thoughts continue, commentary loops, reactions spin. The absence of noise is not the same as the presence of stillness. To truly hear yourself, not your opinions, not your fears, not your goals, but the quiet center beneath all of it, requires something even rarer than silence. It requires noble silence. This silence is not the absence of sound. It's the absence of unnecessary speech, the absence of noise that serves no purpose but to distract, cover up, or avoid. Noble silence is not just about keeping your mouth closed. It's about stepping back from the compulsion to explain, to respond, to defend, to perform. We speak for many reasons. To connect, yes, but also to escape, to avoid discomfort, to control how others see us, to fill the air when we fear what might come up in its absence. Speech becomes a way to edit ourselves in real time, to polish the self we want others to perceive. And when we're constantly speaking, we're rarely listening, not to others and not to ourselves. Intentional silence is a return. It brings the mind closer to the heart. Without the need to speak, something inside relaxes. The pressure to perform softens. The need to impress fades. What's left is honesty, not the kind spoken out loud, but the kind that arises when there's no audience, when there's nothing to maintain, when there's simply presence. Buddhist traditions often encourage periods of noble silence as part of retreats, meditative practice, and daily life. It's not just a technique, it's a doorway, a way to break the habit of speaking without awareness. A practice that shifts the center of gravity from the external to the internal. When you stop talking, you start noticing. You notice your own mind more clearly, how quickly it reacts, how often it judges, how frequently it plans the next thing to say. You begin to see how much energy is spent constructing and defending the identity you present to the world. Silence reveals what speech covers. It is not always comfortable. In fact, at first, it may feel awkward, even anxious. Without words, the usual patterns lose their anchors. You may feel exposed, restless. But this discomfort is not a sign of failure. It's the mind detoxing from overuse. It's the raw truth rising to the surface now that nothing is being said to suppress it. And in that raw truth, healing becomes possible. Not because you're fixing yourself, but because you're no longer running from yourself. Noble silence is not withdrawal, it's re-engagement, a deeper meeting with what's really alive in you. Silence also reveals the quality of your inner dialogue. When the outer voice quiets, the inner voice becomes louder. You start to hear the way you speak to yourself, whether your thoughts are kind or cruel, whether they uplift or tear down. In this way, silence becomes a mirror, one that cannot be escaped. But this mirror is not meant to shame, it's meant to clarify. Once you see what you're saying to yourself, you can begin to shift it. Not by force, but by awareness. You realize that not all thoughts are true, not all thoughts are useful, and not all thoughts are yours to believe. This is the quiet revolution of noble silence. It does not demand that you fix your mind. It simply shows you your mind. And in seeing it clearly, you no longer need to react to it. You begin to make space. Space between thought and action. Space between impulse and response. Space between discomfort and reaction. And in that space, peace lives. Silence also reveals your deeper longings. When the noise fades, what remains is often a quiet ache, a longing for connection, for meaning, for rest. And when those longings are no longer drowned in conversation, you can meet them with presence rather than avoidance. The stillness becomes a kind of sanctuary, not a place to escape the world, but a place to meet the world more clearly. You begin to see that most conversations are not about truth. They are about ego, about comfort, about identity. And while speech can be beautiful, it is rarely as necessary as we believe. Noble silence doesn't mean avoiding others. It means relating to others with presence, with fewer words and more awareness, with listening that is full, not just waiting to respond, with the humility to realize that sometimes the best gift you can offer is your attention, not your opinion. In this way, silence strengthens relationships. It removes the need to dominate, to interrupt, to prove. It makes space for others to unfold without pressure. It allows you to witness rather than control. And it does the same for your relationship with yourself. You begin to see that your value is not in how well you speak, not in how clever your responses are, but in your capacity to be with life honestly. There's a kind of strength that grows in silence, not the hard strength of armor, but the quiet strength of presence, the strength that doesn't need to fill the room, that doesn't need to be right, that doesn't need to be seen to be real. From this silence, decisions become clearer, because you're no longer reacting to the noise, you're no longer pulled by urgency. You can feel the deeper current beneath the surface tension, and you begin to trust it. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry more weight. They're rooted. They come from depth, not from performance. They come from a silence that has touched truth. And this truth begins to change everything. It shows you where you've been hiding behind words. It shows you what you've been avoiding in noise, and it gently invites you back to the present, because the present doesn't need to be narrated. it just needs to be lived. Noble silence also reveals the mind's addiction to movement. Even without speech, the inner voice may continue, planning, commenting, judging. But as you continue the practice, even that begins to soften. Not because you force it to stop, but because you no longer give it your full attention. You learn to rest in awareness itself. Not the content of your mind, but the space behind it. The silent watcher, the place within you that doesn't need to think to be alive, that doesn't need to speak to be real. This awareness is always present, but it is easiest to access when you are still, when the distractions are few, when you're not reaching for the next sentence or the next validation. This awareness is not a mystical state. It is your natural state, uncovered when everything else falls away. And when you live from this awareness, silence is no longer something you visit. It becomes your ground, even when speaking, even when moving through the world. You carry the silence with you, not as absence, but as depth. You no longer speak just to avoid discomfort. You no longer fill the space just to feel safe. You begin to let the silence speak for itself. And in that listening, you hear what cannot be said. There are truths that words cannot touch, truths that only silence reveals, the deep knowing that you are already whole, the quiet understanding that nothing needs to be added, the gentle recognition that life, in this moment, is already enough. This is the power of noble silence, not as a spiritual trick, but as a way of living rooted in presence. It breaks the momentum of distraction. It interrupts the cycle of self-editing. It allows your nervous system to soften. It allows your soul to speak. And in that speaking, without words, you hear your life more clearly, not the life you talk about, the life you are. Now, there is no need to fill the silence. Now, the silence is full, and in that fullness, you are home. When silence becomes familiar, life begins to slow. The urgency fades. The need to explain, defend, or prove loses its grip. But even in stillness, something deeper begins to call, not a craving, not a goal, but a question. How can life be lived in a way that stays close to this calm? How do you carry this inner quiet into every part of your day, not just the moments alone? There is a way. A path worn not by theory, but by the footsteps of those who have lived it fully. Monks, nuns, forest dwellers, not because they sought a better life than yours, but because they discovered something most people overlook. That simplicity, practiced with intention, brings not less, but more. Not more clutter, not more noise, not more tasks, but more depth, more space, more joy. The joy that arises from simplicity is not made of excitement. It is not found in big achievements or rare moments. It does not need to be chased. It's the kind of joy that comes quietly, like light at sunrise, unnoticed until everything looks softer. The monastic way is not about deprivation. It's not about punishment or rejection of life. It's about returning to what is essential, removing what distracts, softening what hardens, and choosing over and over what matters. In Buddhist monastic life, the vow of simplicity touches every part of living. There is little ownership, few possessions, no personal ambition. Time is structured, but not rushed. Meals are shared, but often silent. Clothing is plain, movement is slow, work is purposeful, but not driven by pressure. The entire rhythm is shaped around clarity, around reducing what clouds the mind and obscures the heart. And while most people do not live in monasteries, the wisdom that guides monastic life is not limited to walls or robes. It is available anywhere there is willingness to let go, to shift from accumulation to awareness, to choose depth over excess. In daily life, this begins with space. The physical kind, yes, but also the mental. The decision to own fewer things, not as a trend, but as a practice. Fewer things mean fewer decisions, fewer distractions, fewer chances to anchor your identity in what you possess. Every object carries energy. Every possession asks for attention. When you begin to release what is not necessary, you create room for what truly supports your peace. But simplicity is not just decluttering your house, it's decluttering your day. The way you spend your time reflects what you value. Monastic life protects time, not with strict rules, but with intention. Time is not something to be filled, it is something to be honored. Busyness is often worn like a badge of honor, but beneath it is often avoidance. Avoidance of silence, avoidance of discomfort, avoidance of being alone with what you feel. But simplicity removes the need to stay busy to feel worthy. It replaces doing more with being more present. This also means learning to say no, not to reject life, but to protect its quality. Monastic wisdom values boundaries, not out of selfishness, but because peace cannot grow where there is constant noise. When you simplify your commitments, you give yourself back the chance to show up fully for what remains. Monastic simplicity is rooted in humility. Not the kind that puts you down, but the kind that stops needing to be elevated. When you stop trying to stand out, life becomes lighter. You stop comparing, you stop performing, you start participating, genuinely, without the filter of ego. Humility brings you closer to others. It removes the invisible wall that status and pride create. It lets you ask for help. It lets you listen more than speak. It allows you to be wrong without collapse. It allows others to shine without dimming your light. And it deepens your joy. Because joy doesn't thrive in a performance. It thrives in presence. In being right where you are, without needing to prove that you belong. Monastics eat simply, live simply, walk simply, not because they lack options, but because they have seen that options are not what bring peace. Peace comes from depth, from attention, from relationship. And you can have that too without leaving your home. Start with food, not as a diet, but as a practice. Eat slowly, eat without distraction. Prepare your meals with care, even if they are small. Let your attention infuse what you do. That's where sacredness begins, not in the food itself, but in the way you meet it. Do the same with your tasks. Whether washing dishes or answering emails, do one thing at a time. Not because it's faster, but because it's clearer. When you simplify your attention, your mind becomes less tangled. When your actions are whole, your energy returns. Monastic simplicity also means learning the value of silence in relationships. Not every moment needs to be filled with words. Some of the deepest connections grow in shared stillness, in honest presence, in being together without needing to entertain or impress. When you carry simplicity into how you relate, you begin to notice how much energy goes into saying what isn't needed, into trying to be liked, into smoothing over awkwardness. But when you release that pressure, you discover something easier. Real connection requires less than you thought. You also begin to live more slowly, not out of laziness, but because you no longer rush past life. The monastic pace is unhurried because it trusts the unfolding. When you stop measuring your worth in productivity, you learn to rest without guilt. You learn to move without fear. You begin to experience the joy of a single moment, fully lived. Even your thoughts simplify, not by force, but by rhythm. A slower life reveals the excess thinking that never needed to happen. And when your life becomes less chaotic, your mind becomes less reactive. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means your actions are chosen with care. When you're no longer ruled by impulse, everything becomes more intentional. You speak because something true wants to be said. You act because something meaningful needs to be done. Simplicity also sharpens gratitude. When you have less, you notice more. When life slows, small things become sacred. The warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of breath, the sound of footsteps. These are not background noise. They are the texture of being alive. Monastics live without distraction, not because the world is bad, but because clarity is precious. You begin to see that distraction is not just on screens, it's in habits, it's in resentment, it's in the loop of self-judgment. Simplicity clears space for joy to be seen again. This joy is not emotional excitement, it's steadier, it's the joy of alignment, of knowing that your life, even in its smallest parts, reflects your values, that you are living not from habit or pressure, but from truth. And when your outer life simplifies, your inner life follows. You become more receptive, more open, more grounded. You don't need to chase experiences to feel alive. You are already here, fully. Monastic wisdom reminds us, enough is a decision, not a destination. When you live with less but feel full, you understand abundance. You understand that simplicity is not about lacking, but about letting go of what covers joy. So now, after the silence, you step into life again, not with more, but with less. Less clutter, less distraction, less effort to be something else. And in that less, you find more. More peace, more presence, more joy. Not joy that shouts, but joy that stays. When life slows and simplicity takes root, a new clarity begins to surface. The noise fades, distractions lose their power, and what was hidden beneath everyday busyness starts to reveal itself. And often, what surfaces is craving. Quiet, persistent, deeply conditioned craving. Not just for things, but for feelings, experiences, outcomes, recognition. A longing that doesn't shout, but tugs softly at the mind, telling you there is something missing, something more. Even after simplifying your life, even after removing what's not essential, desire still follows. You may not want more objects, but there may still be hunger for approval, for stimulation, for escape, for perfection. In Buddhist teachings, this is called tanha, often translated as thirst. It is the root of suffering, not because wanting is wrong, but because craving always pulls you away from now. Tanha is not about intention or value. It's not the same as aspiration or healthy motivation. It is about attachment. It is the feeling that unless you have or become or achieve something, you cannot rest. It is what keeps you slightly tilted toward the next thing, the next moment, the next version of peace. This is the most subtle trap, because craving doesn't always feel frantic. It can feel like hope. It can feel like progress. It can feel like something good. But underneath it is tension, a sense that this moment is incomplete, that now is not enough, that you are not enough, and that unless something changes, peace will remain just out of reach. Wanting less doesn't mean suppressing desire. It means understanding it, seeing how it arises, feeling its energy in the body, noticing how it creates stories in the mind. When you become familiar with the process of craving, you no longer need to obey it. You no longer confuse it with truth. You start to realize that the problem is not the desire itself, but the way it hijacks your attention and ties your contentment to something outside of this moment. Desire always creates distance. It lives in the gap between what is and what could be. And as long as your happiness lives in that gap, you are never truly at home. You are always waiting, always slightly leaning forward, always postponing rest. Buddhist practice invites you to watch desire not with judgment, but with curiosity. What happens in your body when craving arises? What thought follows it? What do you believe you will feel when you finally have what you want? And is that feeling truly missing now, or is it just buried beneath the craving itself? Craving often promises joy, but delivers anxiety. It creates a cycle of hunger and dissatisfaction. Even when you get what you want, the satisfaction fades quickly. The mind moves on. A new longing appears, a new idea of fulfillment, and so the chase continues, even when nothing is truly wrong. This is how tanha traps you, not with force, but with restlessness. It makes you think that more will finally be enough. But when you examine closely, you see it never is, because the habit of wanting becomes stronger than the content of the desire. So you begin to practice renunciation, not in a harsh way, not as punishment, but as clarity. Renunciation is not about denying joy. It is about no longer confusing joy with grasping. It is about learning that you can enjoy something without needing to possess it, that you can meet beauty, pleasure, connection without the tension of clinging. Wanting less doesn't mean removing beauty or richness from your life. It means removing the anxiety that says, "I need this to be okay." It means releasing the fear that if you don't get what you want, something is wrong with you or with life. This shift is powerful. It turns your attention inward, not because the outer world is bad, but because the root of restlessness is never out there. It's always in how you relate to what is. When you stop expecting the world to complete you, you discover that you were never incomplete to begin with. The practice is simple but deep. Each time desire arises, you pause, you notice, you feel its pull, you name it, and you choose to stay with it without acting on it, not to repress it, but to know it. You watch as the craving rises and peaks and dissolves. And in that watching, you begin to unlearn the habit of always moving toward. You discover that peace is not the result of having less or more. It is the result of needing less. And that kind of peace is unshakable because it doesn't depend on conditions. It doesn't depend on timing. It is not delayed. It is immediate, the moment you release the grip. The Buddha pointed to this clearly. Craving is the cause of suffering, not because desiring is evil, but because the identification with desire creates a false self. A self always reaching, always aching, always unsatisfied. But when you rest in awareness, you are no longer the one who craves. You are the one who sees. This awareness does not deny desire. It simply refuses to be controlled by it. It allows you to experience wanting without becoming enslaved to it. This is not detachment as indifference. It is freedom as wisdom. From this space, even your desires begin to change. They become quieter, gentler, aligned with truth, not with fear. You may still want to grow, to create, to share, but the desperation is gone. The clinging is gone. The belief that your value depends on the outcome is gone. This leads to true generosity, because you are no longer giving from a place of lack. You are no longer helping others to prove something about yourself. You act from fullness, not from hunger. And this kind of action carries peace with it. It also leads to deeper intimacy. When you want less from others, you see them more clearly. You don't need them to complete your story. You don't demand they fill your gaps. You can love them as they are, not for what they provide. And this love is not dramatic, but enduring. It is not possession, but presence. Wanting less also opens the door to creativity. Because your work is no longer about outcome, it is about expression. It is about truth. You are no longer making art to be seen. You are making it because something inside you is ready to be heard. And perhaps most importantly, you become easier to live with, both for others and for yourself. You are less reactive, less demanding, less caught in highs and lows. Your joy becomes consistent because it is no longer tied to constant fulfillment. It comes from the quiet freedom of enough. This is not something to rush. The mind has been trained to want for a long time. Craving is a habit as much as a response. But with practice, the space between wanting and acting begins to grow. And in that space, you find your peace. You find your clarity. You find yourself not as a wanting thing, but as awareness itself. You realize that true contentment doesn't come from getting what you want. It comes from knowing you don't need it, that you are already home, that nothing out there can complete what is already whole. Now, desire doesn't pull you. It passes through, like wind through an open window. It may rustle your awareness, but it doesn't move your roots. You are no longer carried away. You are still. And in that stillness, there is joy, quiet, unshakable, real. When the grip of craving loosens and the mind stops chasing what it thinks it needs, another layer of inner weight begins to reveal itself. It isn't loud. It doesn't always announce itself clearly, but it lingers, quietly shaping how you feel, how you respond, and how you carry yourself in daily life. It's the heavy presence of unresolved pain, resentment, guilt, betrayal, shame. What hasn't been forgiven? There is no lasting peace without forgiveness. No matter how much you simplify or how deeply you meditate, the heart cannot fully rest when it holds tight to a wound. Forgiveness is not something extra to consider at the end of a spiritual path. It is the path. Without it, you are still carrying the weight of the past. You are still reacting to old stories, old harm, old versions of yourself and others. In Buddhism, forgiveness is not a command. It's not something you do to be moral. It's something you do to be free. The Buddha never taught it as a duty to others, but as a release of the suffering we continue to create by holding on. When you carry a grudge, you are the one who suffers. When you cling to guilt, even when it seems noble, you tighten the self with judgment. And when the self is tight, everything hurts more. Forgiveness begins as an act of compassion, but not just for others. True forgiveness starts with yourself. That doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior. It means recognizing that you are no longer that person who made that mistake. The person who acted from fear, confusion, or pain is not the same person who now regrets it. And yet, you continue to punish yourself as if nothing has changed. This punishment doesn't bring clarity. It doesn't prevent future harm. It only builds layers of shame, and shame distorts perception. It keeps you in a cycle of unworthiness. It blocks you from fully showing up in your life because part of you still believes you do not deserve peace. But the teachings on emptiness offer a doorway through this. They remind you that there is no fixed self, no permanent person who did something wrong. The person who caused harm was the product of conditions, thoughts, emotions, ignorance, past wounds. Not an evil soul, but a confused mind. Understanding this does not excuse behavior. It places it in a broader truth. Things arise because of causes and conditions. And when conditions change, outcomes change. When you forgive yourself, you are not saying what happened was okay. You are saying you no longer need to suffer in order to learn. You are releasing the idea that growth requires punishment. Instead, you allow healing to happen through awareness and responsibility, not guilt and self-hatred. This shift opens space. Space for tenderness, honesty, and change. And from that space, forgiveness of others becomes more possible. Because when you understand your own pain with compassion, you begin to see the pain in others more clearly, not as justification, but as reality. People hurt others because they are hurting, because they are confused, because they do not see clearly. This is not romanticizing harm. It is recognizing that harmful actions come from a place of blindness, not truth. And when you cling to what someone did, when you keep feeding the story, you bind yourself to their ignorance. You become trapped in their pain. Forgiveness is the refusal to let that pain define your future. It is not forgetting. It is not pretending. It is looking clearly at what happened and choosing not to carry the bitterness forward. You stop drinking the poison you hoped would hurt someone else, and you allow your heart to rest. In Buddhist practice, metta, loving kindness, is a powerful gateway into forgiveness, not as a feeling, but as an intention. You begin by wishing yourself well. Even if it feels false, even if the mind resists, you plant the seed. May I be free from suffering. May I forgive myself. May I begin again. From there, you extend the same wish to others, not just those you love, but those who hurt you. Not because they deserve it, but because hatred is heavy. This does not mean you allow harm to continue. Forgiveness does not remove the need for boundaries. In fact, it clarifies them. Because you are no longer reacting out of anger, you can act from wisdom. You can say no clearly. You can walk away without revenge. You can speak truth without cruelty. This is what freedom looks like when it is lived. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as reconciliation. But you can forgive without rebuilding a relationship. You can release anger without inviting someone back into your life. You forgive not to restore the past, but to reclaim the present, to stop being defined by what someone else did. This practice also reveals that grudges are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are subtle. A small resentment, a grudge toward a parent, a friend, a co-worker, even a stranger, or the old bitterness toward yourself for not being stronger, wiser, faster. But every grudge, no matter how small, keeps part of your heart closed. And a closed heart cannot fully receive joy. You may notice that the mind resists this. It says, but they never apologized, they never suffered, they don't deserve forgiveness. And that might be true, but Buddhist teachings ask, do you deserve to stay bound to that pain? Do you want your peace to depend on someone else's behavior? Forgiveness is not a reward for others, it is a release for you. This release takes time. It is not a single decision, it is a process of loosening. You notice when the resentment rises, you name it, you feel its heat, you hold it gently, you don't fight it, but you don't feed it. You keep returning to the intention to let go, even if the feeling doesn't follow right away. And over time, something shifts. The story loses power. The blame softens. The tightness in the chest relaxes. And in its place, space opens up. A space that doesn't forget what happened, but no longer centers it. A space that allows joy to return, not because the past changed, but because your relationship to it did. This is what makes forgiveness liberating. It removes the chains of identification. You stop being the victim of the story. You stop being the villain of your past. You start being present again. And in presence, healing happens without force. Awareness itself becomes the medicine. Even your memories begin to shift, not in their facts, but in their emotional grip. You see them not through pain, but through wisdom. You recognize the conditions, the causes, the human fragility behind the harm. And you begin to understand that no one is their worst moment, not even you. This kind of forgiveness is radical. It challenges everything the ego believes. It says you do not need to carry pain forever, that your strength is not in holding on, but in letting go. That true power is soft, not because it is weak, but because it no longer needs to protect itself with anger. And from this softness, new possibilities appear. Relationships begin to change. The way you hold your own past begins to change. Even the future changes because you are no longer bringing yesterday's wounds into today's choices. Forgiveness is not a favor you do. It is not a performance. It is an inner shift, a quiet surrender to the truth that life is too short, too sacred, too precious to be defined by what went wrong. Now you carry less. You breathe deeper. You walk lighter. Not because everything has been solved, but because you are no longer at war with what cannot be changed. This is the heart of liberation, a freedom that begins in the mind and ripples into everything you touch. Because when you forgive, you are not just releasing pain, you are reclaiming peace. And peace, once known, becomes the ground you return to again and again, When the grip of resentment releases and forgiveness softens the heart, clarity begins to settle. There's a deeper stillness, one that doesn't come from changing the outside world, but from how you now hold your experiences. You stop reacting with old pain. You stop living inside stories that once held you hostage. But as you continue inward, a new layer reveals itself, one that's even more intimate, more constant, and often more unnoticed than anything else: your thoughts. Thoughts don't shout the way anger does. They don't flash like jealousy or ache like sadness. They're quieter, more familiar. So familiar, in fact, that most go undetected. They become part of the atmosphere of the mind, automatic, unnoticed, accepted as truth. But every thought leaves a trace, not just in the moment, but in the shape of your life. Buddhist teachings name this powerful force sankhara, mental formations. The imprints of thought, intention, habit, and emotion that leave residue on your consciousness and guide how your reality unfolds. Sankharas are subtle. They're not just beliefs, but impressions. They influence how you feel, how you speak, how you interpret the world, and they're built through repetition. Every time you think a thought and believe it, it leaves a deeper mark. Every assumption you make, every internal judgment you repeat, every anxious loop you allow strengthens that particular formation. And that's karma, not in the simplified sense of punishment or reward, but in the deeply practical sense of cause and effect. What you repeatedly plant in the mind, you eventually live. This is why the inner voice matters, because even after forgiving others, even after softening the heart, you can still be trapped by the voice in your head. If that voice is harsh, if it's filled with fear, if it constantly rehearses danger or failure, you will still feel unsafe, even in moments of safety. If it tells you you're not good enough, no outer success will quiet the discomfort. And if it sees threat where there is none, your body will remain tense, your breath shallow, your nervous system unsettled. These thoughts don't come from nowhere. They are inherited, learned, shaped by early experiences, culture, trauma, conditioning. But even if you didn't choose their origin, you can choose their continuation. And this is where freedom begins, not by fighting your thoughts, but by recognizing them as events, not truths. Seeing them not as who you are, but as patterns arising from past conditions. When you no longer identify with them, they begin to lose their power. The Buddha taught that karma begins not just in action, but in intention. The thoughts you feed are intentions. Whether through repetition or rumination, they point your mind in a direction. And over time, they harden into tendencies. These tendencies create your emotional reality. They shape what you see, what you expect, how you interpret silence, how you meet uncertainty. For example, a person with a sankhara of distrust will experience kindness as manipulation. A person shaped by self-judgment will interpret neutral moments as rejection. A person whose thoughts constantly imagine worst-case scenarios will never feel safe, even when nothing is wrong. The suffering in these cases doesn't come from the world, it comes from within. But this is not a reason to blame yourself. It's an invitation to take responsibility, gently, because the same law that creates suffering also creates release. Just as harmful sankharas can be reinforced, they can also be weakened. Thoughts can be interrupted. Habits can be softened. Mental patterns can be watched instead of obeyed. And when they're no longer fed, they begin to fade. Meditation is one way this begins, not as an escape from thought, but as a training in awareness. You sit, and the thoughts come. You watch them. You notice their tone, their speed, their story. And instead of reacting or believing, you return to the breath. That act alone, seeing and returning, is the beginning of karmic release. You're interrupting the cycle. You're no longer unconsciously reinforcing the same story. And in that interruption, something begins to heal. You start to notice which thoughts tighten your body, which ones create fear, which ones replay shame. You begin to name them. This is judgment. This is comparison. This is resistance. And in naming, you disidentify. You step back. You remember that you are not the thought. You are the one aware of it. This awareness is not passive. It changes everything. Because once you stop reacting to the thought, it loses its stickiness. Once you stop rehearsing the same mental narrative, your brain rewires itself. The groove becomes shallower, the emotional charge less intense, and over time, your baseline state shifts. This doesn't mean the thoughts never arise, but they no longer define you. You're no longer bound to act on them. You have a choice, and in that choice lies freedom. Your inner dialogue begins to shift as well, not because you force it to be positive, but because you stop feeding what's destructive. Instead of battling the mind, you care for it. You offer it wiser input. Instead of saying, "I can't," you say, "I notice fear, and I can stay with it." Instead of saying, "I always fail," you say, "This is a moment of difficulty. It doesn't define me." These are not affirmations. They are reflections of deeper truth. Truth that softens rather than inflates. Truth that roots you in the present rather than spiraling into identity. Even your language changes, not just in speech, but in thought. You begin to use gentler words when speaking to yourself. You stop calling yourself lazy, broken, stupid. You begin to say, "I am learning, I am struggling, I am growing." These words carry different karmic weight. They create different sankharas. They invite different energy into your system. Over time, they change the way your mind relates to itself. This also transforms how you perceive others. When your inner voice is harsh, you judge others quickly. When you soften inwardly, your view of others softens too. You begin to see their behavior as arising from their own sankharas, their own karma, their own conditioning. This brings compassion, not passivity. You still set boundaries, but you no longer carry hate. This shift in perception is karmic healing, not in some future life, but in this one. When your thoughts are rooted in awareness, your reality becomes lighter. You still feel pain, but you no longer multiply it with resistance. You still face challenges, but you meet them from steadiness, not panic. Even your nervous system begins to regulate, because your body is listening to your thoughts. When you speak kindly inwardly, your breath changes, your muscles release, your heart feels safer. This is not a spiritual metaphor, it's biological reality. Your mind and body are in constant conversation. When your thoughts become grounded, your body begins to trust life again. This trust becomes your baseline, and from that baseline, you start to live differently. You take risks, not because you're fearless, but because you trust your capacity to respond. You speak truth, not because you always know what to say, but because you're no longer ruled by fear of being wrong. All of this begins in the space between stimulus and thought. That tiny moment of pause, that split second where a thought arises and you get to decide, do I believe this? Do I feed this? Do I follow this? The more you practice that pause, the more power you reclaim. Buddhist psychology teaches that thoughts are seeds. They may not sprout immediately, but they grow. They become your habits, your reactions, your world. So you begin to choose your seeds carefully, not out of fear, but out of care. You plant what you want to grow: peace, clarity, compassion, patience, and you become the garden, not the storm. Not because everything is quiet all the time, but because you no longer confuse movement with truth. You watch the weather pass. You root deeper each day. This is how karma begins to shift. Not through rituals or beliefs, but through awareness of thought, through mastery of intention, through the courage to meet your own mind with honesty and gentleness. And with each thought seen clearly, with each moment of pause, a new future opens. Not later, but now, in this breath, in this awareness, in this quiet, unfolding presence that is no longer shaped by habit, but by wisdom. Once the nature of thought is understood, how it forms, how it shapes perception, how it quietly builds the structure of our inner world, a new layer of clarity begins to surface. But beneath the thoughts, often tangled deeper, there is another force at work, a more gripping one: emotions. Thoughts may come and go like whispers in the background, but emotions rise with more intensity. They take over the body, cloud the mind, and in many cases shape behavior more powerfully than beliefs. Even when thoughts are softened, if strong emotions are left unchecked, they continue to run the system. And not just any emotions, the familiar ones, the ones we repeat, the ones that without realizing it, we've become attached to. What many people never stop to question is that emotions themselves can become addictive. Not in a metaphorical way, but in a real, physiological and psychological sense. The body and mind become accustomed to certain emotional states. Anger, worry, sadness, resentment, even guilt. They don't just happen. They return, they replay, and they reinforce themselves through cycles of reaction. Over time, they form grooves in the nervous system. And just like with any addictive pattern, the more they're fed, the stronger they grow. In Buddhist teachings, this cycle is not seen as a personal flaw, but as a conditioned pattern, something that arises due to causes and continues when those causes are fed. The practice of mindful detachment is the process of breaking the cycle by seeing clearly what is happening in real time. It is not about suppressing emotion or pretending it's not there. It is about stepping back enough to see it without merging with it. The habit of emotional reactivity often begins in subtle moments. A tone of voice triggers defensiveness. A delay in response sparks insecurity. A reminder of past pain pulls the mind into a loop. These reactions happen so fast, so automatically, that they seem natural. But natural does not always mean wise, and common does not mean necessary. Mindful detachment interrupts the automatic response. It inserts space. It brings choice back into the experience. To practice this is not to distance yourself from life. It is to be even more present, but present with awareness, not entanglement. You still feel emotions. You still experience joy, sorrow, fear, desire, but you are no longer ruled by them. They become weather, not identity, movement, not command, and that shift makes all the difference. When emotions take over, they shape perception. If the emotion is anger, the mind looks for someone to blame. If it is fear, the mind searches for danger. If it is sadness, everything appears heavy. But when you observe the emotion as it is, rather than through it, perception becomes clear again. You are no longer seeing through a filter. You are seeing the filter itself. This is where mindfulness becomes medicine. Mindfulness, sati in Pali, is not just noticing what's happening. It is remembering to notice. It is sustaining attention long enough to observe the pattern instead of becoming it. With mindfulness, you begin to see the first moment of heat before it becomes rage, the first flicker of sadness before it becomes a narrative of despair, the first tightening in the chest before the story of rejection unfolds. This early noticing is powerful because it gives you a chance to pause, and the pause is everything. In the pause, you can feel the emotion without fueling it. You can name it without needing to act on it. You can hold it like a wave, knowing it will rise and fall without your help. Over time, this breaks the emotional addiction. Because the addiction isn't just to the feeling itself, it's to the reaction. The pattern of fueling, feeding, expressing, regretting, and then starting over. When you stop reacting, the loop weakens, the charge fades, the emotion still comes, but it does not stay long. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. On the contrary, it makes you more capable of experiencing emotion fully. But the experience is no longer overwhelming. It is no longer blinding. You are with the emotion, not inside of it. This is mindful detachment, not dissociation, not escape, but full presence with awareness. What makes emotions addictive is the temporary sense of identity they offer. Anger feels powerful. Sadness can feel validating. Anxiety feels like control. Even guilt can feel righteous. But all of them cover something deeper: silence, openness, vulnerability. When you stay with the emotion without feeding it, you begin to feel what was underneath it all along. Often, what arises next is tenderness, or grief, or simply quiet. And in that quiet, something begins to heal. You start to realize that emotions are not permanent. They don't define you. They are experiences that come and go. When you no longer resist this truth, you stop building stories around them. You stop defending them. You stop needing them to justify your actions. This is where emotional maturity begins. You can be angry without being cruel. You can be sad without collapsing. You can be afraid without running. You hold space for the emotion, and in that space, it begins to loosen. It moves through you, not against you. This kind of inner strength is not loud. It doesn't show itself in control or restraint. It shows itself in softness, in the ability to stay open in discomfort, to stay kind when provoked, to stay grounded when waves rise. That strength comes from practice, and the practice is not complex. It is simply noticing and allowing. It is breathing into what arises without making it personal. The more you do this, the more you begin to see the roots of your emotional habits. Where did this fear begin? When did this resentment first take shape? How many times have I played out this same story in different forms? And then, the deeper question, is this still necessary? You might discover that much of your emotional landscape is outdated, that you are reacting to life from old wounds, not current reality, that the patterns you feel most attached to are not who you are, but who you learn to be in moments of difficulty. Mindful detachment allows you to update your relationship to these patterns, to thank them for their service, and to begin choosing something else. And with choice comes freedom. You can choose to rest instead of spiraling. You can choose silence instead of reaction. You can choose curiosity instead of judgment. And each time you do, you are reshaping the nervous system, softening the mind, and creating a new inner path. This also transforms your relationships. When you are no longer addicted to emotional reaction, you become less defensive, less controlling, less reactive. You listen more, you speak less. You stop needing others to behave in ways that protect your emotions. You take responsibility for your own state, and that responsibility brings dignity. You also begin to hold others more gently, because you recognize that their emotional reactions are habits too, that their anger is not personal, that their fear is not an attack. You no longer meet fire with fire. You become the stillness that helps others find their way back. This is how mindful detachment becomes compassion, not as a performance, but as a natural result of presence. The less entangled you are with your own emotional story, the more space you have to meet others in theirs. And beneath all of this, something even deeper begins to arise. Contentment. A quiet, stable well-being that is not dependent on perfect emotions or calm days. A peace that comes not from control, but from understanding. You no longer fear your emotions, so they no longer control you. You feel the wave rise, and you breathe. You watch it crest, and you breathe. You feel it pass, and you remain, not as a wall, but as a witness, steady, whole, alive. And in that presence, something remarkable happens. You are no longer reacting to life. You are living it, fully, freely, without needing every moment to feel good in order for it to be enough, without needing every emotion to be pleasing for it to be acceptable. You are here, aware, untangled, present, and that is freedom. Not later, now. As emotional attachments loosen and the constant pressure to react begins to fade, a quieter truth starts to surface. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't rise like anger or ache like sorrow. It doesn't demand anything. It simply waits, quietly, beneath everything you've been striving to be. And when you finally notice it, the recognition comes with both surprise and softness. You don't need to be special, not in the way the world defines it, not in the way your ego has been trained to crave, not in the way that turns your existence into a performance, always waiting for recognition, always fearing invisibility. There is a different kind of peace, one that arises when you stop trying to stand out, stop trying to be exceptional, and instead allow yourself to simply be. Zen teachings often point directly to this, that the self we try so hard to refine, to polish, to distinguish, is an illusion, that the craving to be unique, admired, validated, is not strength but tension, that the mind constantly asking, "Am I enough?" is creating its own suffering. The peace you seek is not hidden in being extraordinary. It is waiting in the humility of being nobody in particular. This does not mean your life is meaningless. It means you stop needing your meaning to be proven. When you drop the idea that you must become someone, you finally begin to feel the calm of simply being here, existing not as an achievement, but as presence. This is not about giving up. It's about giving in to the truth that the effort to be impressive is often the barrier to joy. The belief that your worth depends on being better than others is a deep root of anxiety. It turns life into competition, not connection. It makes every interaction a measurement, every silence a threat, every success not a cause for celebration, but a benchmark to be defended. You begin to live in comparison, not in truth. When this drops, something different takes its place. Not emptiness in the negative sense, but spaciousness, a widening of the heart, a releasing of the need to be recognized, acknowledged, praised. What remains is softness. You can walk into a room and not need to be noticed. You can do your work without expecting applause. You can live your life without constantly asking how it measures up. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop needing to be seen a certain way. And when that craving dissolves, your actions become cleaner. You help not to be appreciated, but because helping feels right. You speak not to impress, but because there's something true to say. You create not to be admired, but because expression itself is alive in you. The ego thrives on identity. It needs roles, titles, stories. It wants to feel chosen, important, irreplaceable. But these identities are heavy. They require constant maintenance, and often they're not even true. You begin to believe the story more than you live the life. You become so attached to being seen a certain way that you lose touch with how you actually feel. Zen humility is not self-loathing. It's the deep understanding that who you are cannot be defined by status or self-image. It's the freedom of stepping back from your own narrative. It's the willingness to be just one human among many, without needing to be exceptional in order to belong. This changes the way you relate to everything. It changes how you hold failure. If you are not trying to be someone special, failure is no longer an identity crisis. It's just a moment. It changes how you respond to success. If you are not attached to praise, success becomes a passing wind, not something that defines you, not something to chase. It also changes how you view others. When you no longer need to be special, you no longer need others to be beneath you. You can appreciate someone else's gifts without feeling threatened. You can listen fully without planning how to insert your own story. You stop living through comparison and begin living through connection. This is real humility, not hiding, not pretending to be small, but letting go of the need to be big. Knowing you are already whole, not because others agree, but because nothing is missing. You are not trying to disappear. You are letting go of the need to be more than what you are. In this space, love becomes easier. Not romantic love, but the kind of love that arises when you see yourself in others. When you stop judging their flaws because you are no longer so obsessed with covering your own. When you meet others without needing anything from them to feel okay. This is what makes humility powerful. It clears space for real intimacy. You also stop overthinking your path. When you are not trying to be extraordinary, you can live with greater honesty. You choose work that aligns with your values, not your image. You rest when tired, not when you think you've earned it. You move through the world without needing every step to be validated. And that freedom brings stability, a quiet kind of confidence, not that you are better, but that you are enough. You notice the small moments again, the everyday beauty that gets missed when you're busy trying to be important. You begin to value presence over performance, simplicity over strategy. You no longer need your life to be loud. You just need it to be real. Letting go of specialness also heals shame, because shame is often the result of not living up to the image we created of who we were supposed to be. When you stop needing to live up to anything, shame has nowhere to grow. You meet yourself with honesty, not evaluation, and this honesty opens the door to real compassion. Not the kind that comes from pity, but the kind that sees clearly and still embraces. You stop performing self-worth and begin practicing it, not through words, but through the way you show up for your own life, without fanfare, without needing the world to clap. There is peace here, a peace that doesn't need to be earned, a peace that arises when the pressure to be someone else finally fades. You are not your title, your looks, your likes, your name. You are something simpler, something more durable. You are this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. You are the silence beneath the thoughts, the awareness watching it all. And that awareness has never needed to be special. It has only needed to be seen. When the desire to be exceptional dissolves and the burden of performance falls away, something unexpected begins to emerge. Clarity. Not a sharp, aggressive clarity, but a soft, steady kind. The kind that sees without needing to control. The kind that feels safe, not because it dominates, but because it stands on stable ground. From this ground, questions arise, not out of anxiety, but out of sincerity. How do I live? How do I move through this world without creating more harm? How do I stay rooted in peace when life pulls in so many directions? The answer is not found in perfection or in following someone else's ideal. It's found in integrity, a kind of quiet inner alignment that holds steady no matter what is happening outside. In Buddhism, this alignment is supported by the 5 precepts. Often misunderstood as rigid rules, they are not about morality in the conventional sense. They are not commands meant to restrict. They are tools to build self-respect, foundations for peace, anchors for a life that feels clean, honest, and rooted. When the mind is no longer obsessed with image, and the heart no longer grasps for importance, something else matters more: how it feels to live with yourself. Not how others see you, but how you move through your day, whether your actions leave peace or residue, whether your words create clarity or confusion, whether your thoughts line up with your values. The precepts are not about being righteous. They are about removing friction from your own mind. They point to the kind of peace that only grows when nothing inside you is hiding. The first precept is to refrain from taking life. On the surface, this sounds obvious. But it is not just about physical harm. It's about cultivating a deep respect for life in all its forms. That includes not acting from aggression, not harming with words, not crushing the spirit of another to feel strong. It includes the small moments, how you treat the insects in your home, how you drive in traffic, how you respond to someone's vulnerability. This precept is about honoring life as sacred. And when you live this way, something changes in your nervous system. You become less reactive, less defensive. Because you are not living with the hidden tension of aggression, you're aligned with respect, and that respect reflects back to you in the way you carry yourself. The second precept is to refrain from taking what is not given. Again, it seems simple, but it goes deeper. It's not just about theft, it's about trust, about not taking credit that isn't yours, about not manipulating others for emotional gain, about not taking more than you need, whether in conversation, attention, or resources. Living this precept is a way of saying, I have enough. And when you begin to live from enough, the constant background noise of wanting starts to quiet down. Your mind becomes easier to live with because it's no longer negotiating or justifying small breaches of honesty. You no longer feel like you're getting away with something, you're simply living cleanly, and that brings rest. The third precept is to refrain from sexual misconduct. This precept is not about repression, it's about awareness, about choosing relationships and actions that are rooted in mutual respect and consent, about not using others as a means to fill emptiness, about not confusing intensity with intimacy. It's about honoring your own energy and the energy of others with care. When your relationships are based on truth, not craving, they bring stability. When your connections are honest, not performative, they support growth. This precept is about bringing your body and your heart into alignment, so your longing does not lead to harm or confusion. When you do this, the background anxiety in your relationships fades. You no longer wonder if you're betraying your own values. You are living from them. The fourth precept is to refrain from false speech. This goes beyond lying. It includes gossip, exaggeration, passive aggression, manipulation, even the small ways we twist our words to look better or avoid discomfort. Speech carries karmic weight. Every word either builds clarity or confusion. Every conversation either deepens trust or wears it down. This precept is a call to precision and kindness, to speak only what is necessary, what is true, what is timely. It doesn't mean you always say what others want to hear. It means you speak with integrity. You speak from stillness, not reactivity. And when your speech becomes clear, your mind becomes clearer too, because you are no longer tangled in regret or rehearsing what you said or worrying about being found out. You are no longer bending your truth. You are standing in it. The fifth precept is to refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. This is often misunderstood as a moral ban, but it is an act of self-protection, not because pleasure is wrong, but because clarity is precious. The mind is already full of habits, reactions, impulses. When it is further clouded by substances that dull awareness, suffering increases. Not always in obvious ways, but in subtle ways. Unwise choices, unclear speech, lowered boundaries, increased regret. This precept is about guarding your own peace, about honoring your awareness. It doesn't mean fear or rigidity. It means valuing sobriety of mind as a foundation for freedom. When you live with a clear mind, you notice more. You act with more precision. You remember your values in real time. These 5 precepts are not about being good. They are about living in a way that creates less inner conflict. Each one is a tool for self-respect, a way to live with fewer regrets. When you follow them sincerely, not as rules but as reminders, you begin to feel lighter. Not because life becomes easier, but because you stop adding unnecessary weight. You stop leaving behind small trails of unease. Your energy becomes more whole, your attention less scattered. Living from the precepts doesn't mean you never make mistakes. It means you begin to notice them sooner. You begin to make repairs more easily. You no longer spiral in shame. You correct your course and keep going. And that ability to return to your values, to your breath, to your center, is what makes you strong. Over time, these principles become more than outer guidelines. They become an inner compass, not a voice of judgment, but a quiet sense of direction. They help you navigate complex situations with a steady hand. You don't need to overthink every decision because you have a clear foundation. You know where you stand, and that self-knowledge frees up energy. The mind that was once tangled in second-guessing now rests in clarity. And this clarity isn't harsh, it's spacious. It allows for softness, for patience, for forgiveness. Because when you live in alignment, you no longer project your own inner conflict onto others. You stop blaming, stop attacking, stop defending so much. Your life becomes more honest, more gentle, and the people around you feel it too. This is not about moral superiority, it is about psychological peace. The kind of peace that comes when you are no longer at war with your own behavior, when your choices reflect what you value, when your actions are not perfect but sincere. You begin to live in a way that doesn't require apology. You begin to trust yourself again, and in that trust, you find something more lasting than praise. You find stability. You find respect, not from others, but from within. And that respect, once steady, becomes a deep root for everything else. As inner alignment deepens and your choices begin to reflect your values more honestly, the foundation for real peace is laid. No longer pulled by shame or confusion, your attention becomes clearer, more available. And with that clarity, a deeper truth begins to press through, one that is not always comfortable at first, but ultimately liberating. Even when you live with integrity, even when your actions are kind, there remains one persistent source of discomfort: the resistance to change. You may walk your path with awareness, you may speak truthfully and live gently, but if you have not come to terms with impermanence, your peace will still depend on things staying a certain way. And when life shifts, as it always does, the mind contracts, the body tenses, the heart resists. Because even the wisest part of you still quietly hopes that the things you love will last, that what's beautiful won't fade, that what's safe won't leave, that what's painful can be avoided forever. Anicca, or impermanence, is not just a teaching. It's not meant to stay in the mind. It is something that must be experienced fully in the body, in the breath, in the cells. It's the direct seeing that nothing is fixed, not your emotions, not your thoughts, not your body, not the people you love, not the circumstances you depend on. It's the understanding that every moment is already becoming something else. This truth can feel threatening if it remains intellectual. It sounds like loss. It sounds like instability. But when you begin to feel it deeply, without resistance, it changes everything. Because what impermanence really offers is freedom. Freedom from clinging, freedom from illusion, freedom from the impossible task of trying to hold life still. The problem is never change itself. The problem is attachment. The tension comes not from the shift, but from the refusal to allow it. You suffer not because something ended, but because you wanted it to stay. You fear not because something is unknown, but because you expected it to be predictable. And the deeper the craving for permanence, the more subtle the suffering becomes. This is why impermanence must move beyond concept. You cannot reason your way into peace. You must feel it. You must sit with the discomfort of things falling away and allow it to be what it is. This is the difference between knowing about fire and standing close enough to feel its heat. Impermanence, when fully felt, doesn't make you numb. It makes you alive. Start small. Sit with the breath. Feel how it rises and falls without your control. Notice how sensation comes and goes, how thoughts drift in and out like waves. Even joy shifts, even pain softens. Every moment that once felt permanent becomes memory. This isn't a flaw in life, it is the nature of life, and the more you see it in real time, the more trust begins to grow. Impermanence teaches you that holding on doesn't protect you. It only exhausts you. That security based on control is always fragile. That trying to make things stay only creates more fear. But when you let go, not as a strategy, but as a surrender, you begin to touch a different kind of stability. The kind that comes not from what stays, but from your ability to stay present through the change. This shift softens everything. You stop clinging to good moments. You stop fearing the hard ones. You begin to live more honestly, more fully, because you know nothing lasts. And strangely, that makes the beauty more vivid, the love more real, the connection more sacred. Not because you can hold it forever, but because you no longer need to. When impermanence is seen clearly, it also changes how you meet your own mind. You stop defining yourself by temporary emotions. You no longer believe that how you feel right now is how you'll always feel. You stop creating fixed identities around sadness, anxiety, doubt. You see that these too are weather systems passing through. You begin to trust that nothing you experience is final. Even your mistakes soften in the light of impermanence. What once felt like a permanent flaw becomes a moment of misalignment. What once felt like shame becomes a doorway to compassion. You stop locking yourself into the past. You stop expecting the future to be a repetition. You begin to live from this moment only, because this is the only place anything real is happening. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is a warm, open recognition of life's movement. You no longer chase permanence where it can't be found. You no longer resist the flow of life trying to teach you how to let go. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means you're no longer fighting a river you cannot stop. You're learning how to float. This realization brings a deep kind of ease. Not because the world stops shifting, but because you stop needing it to behave. You become more fluid, more adaptive, more at peace in moments that used to feel threatening. Your nervous system begins to settle, not because life becomes perfect, but because you're no longer clinging to the idea that it should be. And when you live this way, your relationships change too. You love people without trying to possess them. You listen without trying to fix them. You stay close without needing guarantees. You appreciate them more deeply because you know nothing is promised. Every moment becomes a gift, not a transaction, and in this presence, love becomes less anxious. It becomes more honest, more gentle. You also begin to grieve differently, not with less emotion, but with less resistance. Grief still hurts, loss still matters, but you stop being shocked by it. You stop seeing it as a mistake. You allow it to move through you instead of trying to push it away, and in doing so, you suffer less. Not because you avoid pain, but because you stop adding fear on top of it. Impermanence teaches you to live with reverence, because you realize that everything you experience is a temporary guest. Every sunrise, every meal, every embrace. You stop sleepwalking through your days. You start noticing the details. You stop waiting for something bigger and start paying attention to what's already here. This presence is not passive, it's deeply engaged. Because when you know that nothing lasts, you stop wasting your time. You stop waiting for better conditions. You live now. You act now. You speak the truth now. You love now, not recklessly, but wholeheartedly. Because you know that each moment is both precious and unrepeatable. When impermanence becomes embodied, it changes the texture of your life. The same events still unfold. Joy still comes and goes. Challenges still arise. But you are no longer defined by what you hold or what you lose. You become rooted in awareness itself, and that awareness, unlike everything else, doesn't change. It sees change, it allows it, it holds it, but it does not become it. This is what makes impermanence a gateway to freedom. It strips away what is false. It reveals what is reliable. Not the outer world, not the mind's stories, but the quiet, spacious presence that remains as everything else shifts. That presence is your true home. Not because it avoids change, but because it embraces it. And now, you don't have to fear endings. You don't have to chase beginnings. You are at peace with the truth that everything moves, everything breathes, everything is in process, and so are you. When impermanence is not just understood, but embodied, life softens. Each moment becomes a passing guest, and you learn to hold it gently without needing to trap it in permanence. This deep acceptance opens a door not only to emotional freedom, but also to greater sensitivity toward yourself, your body, your habits. As your relationship with the present moment deepens, so too does your awareness of how you care for the body that carries you through all this change. And there, within the most basic act of living, arises an opportunity for profound healing, the way you eat. Food is not just fuel, it is connection, comfort, memory, routine. It can be celebration, punishment, escape, or presence. For many, eating is where patterns of avoidance and control appear the most clearly. It's where love and shame can become confused. It's where speed replaces attention. But eating, when met with mindfulness, becomes more than a physical act. It becomes a spiritual practice, a practice of care, attention, and quiet devotion to the body and the life within it. Mindful eating is not a technique to eat less or to control your weight. It is not about discipline, it is about relationship. The relationship you have with food often reflects the relationship you have with yourself. If you eat in a rush, without awareness, you may also be rushing through your life. If you eat with guilt, you may carry that same guilt in other areas. If you eat to avoid feeling, you may be doing the same in your speech, in your work, in your choices. When you bring attention to eating, you begin to see these patterns more clearly. Eating slowly is one part, but even more essential is the quality of attention you bring to it. Are you tasting the food or just consuming it? Are you aware of the textures, the sensations, the smells? Do you know when your body is truly hungry, or are you responding to stress, boredom, or habit? Do you know when your body has had enough, or are you using fullness to feel safe or numb? These questions are not to shame you. They are to invite you into a deeper conversation with your own life. Every bite you take is an opportunity to return to the body, to the breath, to the truth of the moment. And this kind of presence begins to shift your relationship with yourself. It is difficult to hate a body you are truly present with. It is difficult to mistreat yourself when you are listening closely. Many people eat on autopilot, while working, while scrolling, while walking, while watching. This removes the act of nourishment from consciousness. It becomes mechanical, which is why it so often leads to imbalance. When you are disconnected from the experience of eating, you are also disconnected from the signals your body gives you. You don't know when you've had enough, or when you're eating from a place of emotion rather than need. But when you eat with presence, something changes. The body begins to trust you, the nervous system relaxes, digestion improves. You begin to feel not just physically nourished, but emotionally calmer. Because you are not just feeding your body, you are feeding your attention. You are offering care through action, not just thought. This practice is also deeply connected to self-love. Not the idea of love, but the act of it. Self-love is not only affirmations or self-talk. It's also how you treat yourself when no one is watching. It's how you choose your food, not from rules or guilt, but from listening. It's how you pause before eating, not because someone told you to, but because you feel a quiet reverence for what you're about to receive. Food is a form of intimacy. It enters your body, becomes part of you. How you relate to it matters. When you bring mindfulness to eating, you begin to choose foods that honor your energy rather than react to cravings. Not from fear, but from clarity. You stop eating to punish or reward yourself. You stop moralizing your meals. You simply meet your body where it is, with what it needs. Mindful eating also reveals emotional undercurrents. You may find that you reach for food when you're lonely, or when you're sad, or when you're trying not to feel something else. None of this is wrong, it's human, but when you see it clearly, you begin to explore other ways of responding. You start asking yourself, what am I actually hungry for right now? Is it food, or is it care? Is it comfort, or is it distraction? This awareness doesn't demand that you stop. It invites you to slow down, to become curious. And that curiosity leads to freedom, not because you follow new rules, but because you understand yourself better. You are no longer acting from habit, you are choosing from presence. The body responds to this attention. It begins to feel less threatened, less defensive. You no longer need to binge or restrict to feel in control. You no longer tie your worth to your appetite. You are no longer at war with hunger. You begin to feel, maybe for the first time, that eating can be a way of saying yes to life rather than controlling it. This doesn't require perfect meals or expensive food. It requires presence. You can eat rice and feel connected to the moment. You can drink water and feel nourished if your mind is truly there. You don't need to cook elaborate dishes or follow complicated rules. You need to taste, to pause, to breathe, and to treat your body not as a problem to fix, but as a partner to care for. Over time, this changes more than your meals. It changes your rhythm. You begin to move through the day with more attention, more gratitude. You stop rushing from one thing to the next. You take time to care for yourself, not as a performance, but as a quiet expression of self-respect. And that self-respect grows stronger. You begin to notice how good it feels to live this way. Not controlled, not rigid, but present. You realize that mindful eating is not just about food. It's about how you live. It's about how you make space for your needs, how you listen to the body's signals before they turn into suffering, how you soften around discomfort instead of numbing it. This practice is also a way of reclaiming your body from cultural conditioning. So many messages tell you what to eat, how to look, how to measure your worth through appearance. Mindful eating returns the power to you, not through resistance, but through awareness. You stop outsourcing your decisions. You start trusting your own inner voice. And that voice becomes louder, clearer, more compassionate over time. You may begin to view meals as moments of ritual, not in a religious sense, but in a human sense. A time to reconnect, to return, to breathe. You may sit at your table without distractions. You may close your eyes for a moment before eating. You may feel gratitude for the hands that prepared the food, for the body that receives it, for the life that sustains you. This kind of attention isn't about doing it perfectly. It's about doing it sincerely. There will be days when you eat too quickly or out of habit. That's part of the process. The key is to notice, to come back, to forgive, to begin again. And each time you begin again, you strengthen something inside you. A thread of presence, a thread of care. You become more stable, more aware, more loving, not because you followed a plan, but because you listened to what was true. Food becomes not just nutrition, but a daily practice of grounding, of meeting yourself, of choosing to care. And in that practice, you slowly learn to love yourself, not in theory, but in action. And that love, once nourished, becomes the ground from which everything else grows. When care begins to show up in daily acts, when meals become a practice of love rather than control, a sense of peace starts to take root. The body is no longer an enemy. Attention becomes a form of kindness, and in this grounded presence, stillness feels closer. But here, too, something subtle must be seen clearly. There is a line, often invisible, between true stillness and quiet avoidance, between inner rest and spiritual laziness. And if that line is not understood, the very peace you are trying to cultivate can become a hiding place. It is possible to mistake inaction for wisdom, to call it surrender when, in truth, it's fear, to call it acceptance when it's actually passivity. The outer form of stillness can look the same in both cases: no movement, no reaction, but what's happening inside is completely different. One comes from deep understanding, the other from subtle resistance. One is alive with awareness, the other is quietly stuck. Spiritual laziness is not obvious. It often dresses itself as ease. It uses spiritual language to justify not showing up. It whispers things like, "It doesn't matter," or "just let go," or "everything is fine as it is." while inside, energy is stagnant and the heart is disconnected. This kind of laziness does not look like chaos. It looks like emptiness, but not the liberating kind. The kind that avoids discomfort by doing nothing in the name of peace. Stillness, in contrast, is not a lack of energy. It is focused presence. It is a quiet that comes from understanding, not withdrawal. When you are truly still, you are aware. You are fully in contact with what is here. You are not moving, not because you are afraid or avoiding, but because there is nowhere to go, no desire to escape, no need to fix or reach, just a full meeting of this moment with nothing extra. The key difference lies in attention. In spiritual laziness, attention is fuzzy. You are disconnected from feeling. You may speak of flow, surrender, ease, but underneath it, the body is holding tension. The mind is scattered. The emotions are numbed. There's often a lack of clarity, a subtle dishonesty, not malicious, but unconscious. It's easier to pretend that you've arrived than to keep looking deeper. Real stillness, however, sharpens your perception. It brings alertness. You may be doing nothing outwardly, but inwardly you are listening. There is sensitivity, not dullness. There is spaciousness, not emptiness. And this kind of stillness is not passive. It's active in its own quiet way. It requires discipline to stay with discomfort. It requires courage to not follow every impulse. It requires honesty to see what's really going on beneath the surface. Avoidance often arises when you've tasted a bit of relief and want to stay there. You may have let go of some pain, some striving, and in that relief decide that the work is done. You cling to the calm and resist anything that might disturb it. This is understandable. But true peace is not fragile. It can hold difficulty. It can hold truth. If your peace shatters in the face of challenge, it was not rooted in stillness. It was floating in avoidance. Another form of spiritual laziness is the overuse of language. Phrases like "everything is one" or "nothing matters" can become shields, not because they are untrue, but because they're used to shut down inquiry. True insight opens the heart. It brings humility, curiosity, gentleness. It does not close the door to reflection. It does not dismiss emotion or bypass the pain of others. To know if you are resting in stillness or hiding in spiritual laziness, ask yourself how connected you feel to your body, to your breath, to your relationships, to your responsibilities. Avoidance often feels like distance, like drifting, like subtle numbness. Stillness feels like intimacy, like clarity, like being fully alive, even in silence. Stillness brings energy, not stimulation, but vitality. You feel more capable, not less. You feel more whole, not indifferent. You show up more fully, not less often, because stillness is the ground that supports wise action. You rest, and from that rest, you move with precision. You don't act impulsively, but when you act, it's clean. You speak only when necessary, but when you speak, it's true. You simplify, not to escape, but to meet life more clearly. Spiritual laziness drains energy because it's a form of holding back, a subtle bracing against life. You may feel tired often, disconnected from purpose, or vaguely heavy. Not because life is too much, but because the body and mind are caught in an unresolved loop of postponement. postponing honesty, postponing action, postponing attention. To break out of this loop, discipline is needed. Not force, but consistency. A return to practice, a willingness to feel again, to look again, to move again, not because you're restless, but because you're ready. Ready to meet life without hiding behind stillness. And this is where mindfulness becomes essential, not just in meditation, but in the small moments. Are you showing up for what you say matters to you? Are you acting in alignment with what you know to be true? Are you making choices from fear or from wisdom? These questions don't require you to be perfect. They ask you to be awake. Sometimes stillness looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like fierce presence. Sometimes it means not speaking. Sometimes it means saying what needs to be said. It's not about the outer form. It's about the quality of presence behind the form. Are you aware? Are you honest? Are you connected? When you're truly still, even rest becomes sacred. Even inaction has depth. Because it's no longer a break from life, it is life, fully met in its quietest form. There's no guilt, no shame, no pretending. Just the breath, the body, the truth of this moment. And when you move from that place, your actions carry clarity. They are fewer, but more aligned. You don't chase, you don't prove, you don't avoid. You act when it's time. You rest when it's needed. You listen more than you explain. You feel more than you analyze. And that rhythm, quiet, steady, awake, becomes your home. True stillness is not avoidance. It's commitment. It's presence without performance. It's the place where nothing is missing and nothing needs to be added. It's the resting ground of deep inner work that needs no external recognition. So, you continue. Not by doing more, but by doing what's real. You return to your breath. You return to your body. You return to the moment you tried to escape. And in that return, you discover what was always waiting beneath the noise. Not passivity, not withdrawal, but peace, rooted, alive, unshaken. As stillness becomes clearer, not as a way to avoid life, but as a path to meet it fully, you start to notice how presence itself has many shapes. Silence can be rich with energy. Rest can be alive with clarity. Yet still, in the quiet, something deeper begins to call, a need to move. Not from restlessness, not from urgency, but from a desire to feel the whole body again, not just the breath, not just awareness, but the physical rhythm of living. This is where walking meditation enters. It's the form of mindfulness that meets you exactly where you are, in motion, step by step, without leaving behind the presence you've cultivated. When you walk with attention, you bring stillness into movement. You don't lose the silence, you bring it with you. Modern life is fast. Even when you slow down internally, your environment often pulls you back into its pace. Notifications, deadlines, noise, distraction. Walking meditation is a way to meet that pull with grounded rhythm. You walk not to get somewhere, but to return to yourself. You use movement to deepen connection, not to escape. And in doing so, you dissolve the split between mind and body. When you walk slowly, deliberately, you begin to feel how much you've been rushing through life, not just physically, but emotionally. Slowness reveals things. It shows you how often your steps are ahead of your breath, how often your mind is elsewhere, how often your body is treated like a machine, expected to carry you without complaint. In walking meditation, you bring all of yourself to each step. The foot lifts, the leg moves, the soul touches the ground. Nothing is automatic, everything is felt. This simplicity is powerful because it interrupts the trance of efficiency. It invites you into a different kind of intelligence, one that is not about speed, but about awareness. The goal is not to walk perfectly. It's to walk honestly, to feel the ground, to listen to the way your body meets gravity, to notice tension in your shoulders, in your jaw, in your pace. These details aren't distractions. They are the path itself. They are how you reconnect the parts of you that daily life tends to scatter. Walking slowly isn't easy at first. The mind resists. It says you're wasting time, that you should move faster, that this is pointless. These thoughts are part of the practice. You see them arise, and you stay with the step. You notice irritation, impatience, boredom, and you keep walking. You let the movement anchor you, not to escape thought, but to meet it differently. This form of meditation also helps regulate the nervous system. The rhythm of slow walking calms the body without shutting it down. Unlike sitting, which can feel static or distant, walking engages the whole system. It allows you to stay grounded while still processing. Movement becomes a container. Breath becomes your companion. And gradually, the mind settles. Not because you're trying to silence it, but because you are no longer following it. You don't need a special place, a hallway, a garden, a quiet sidewalk. What matters is the intention. You're not walking to get anywhere. You're walking to arrive in each step. And each time you return to the step, you return to your life, fully, without judgment. You may also begin to feel emotions rise during walking meditation. The body remembers things that thought doesn't. Movement stirs memory. It stirs grief. It stirs joy. These aren't problems. They are invitations to stay present with what arises. You walk with your whole being, not just your thoughts, but your history, your tension, your healing. Walking in this way builds integration. The mind stops being the commander. It becomes a listener. It stops demanding that the body move according to its stories. It begins to honor the body's rhythm, and from this respect, internal harmony starts to grow. The parts of you that once felt disconnected begin to come back into relationship. You may start to feel how many decisions are made from tension, how much of your urgency is inherited, how often your pace is based on anxiety, not need. As you walk slowly, this urgency loses credibility. You realize that you can be present without rushing, that the world won't fall apart if you don't hurry, and that often, when you do move slower, what matters becomes more clear. Slowness is not laziness. It is depth. It is a way of moving that does not skip over life. It is not about being inefficient. It's about being awake, about meeting the details you usually miss. The sound of your own footsteps, the feel of air on your skin, the way your chest rises and falls with each step. These moments become portals into peace, not as a feeling, but as a state of being. As you develop this practice, you may notice that your ordinary walking changes too. You no longer stomp, you no longer rush unconsciously. You move with more grace, not for appearance, but because your body is no longer being dragged by your thoughts. It's leading, it's guiding, and your awareness is following with respect. Walking meditation also helps you transition between spaces, from work to home, from one activity to another. It can clear residue from the last interaction. It can center you before the next one. It can restore your focus in the middle of the day. You don't need long stretches of time. A few slow minutes can reset your entire mental state. This is especially useful when emotions are strong. When you're agitated, sad, or overwhelmed, walking can help regulate without suppressing. It gives your body something to do while your mind softens. It reminds you that movement and stillness can coexist, that you can be in motion without being reactive, that you can be present without being still, and this presence extends beyond your body. When you walk with awareness, you begin to see more clearly. The way light touches a wall, the shape of trees, the way people move around you. You become less absorbed in your inner world and more attuned to the life around you. Not to escape, but to reconnect. In this way, walking becomes more than therapy. It becomes communion with the earth, with your body, with each moment as it unfolds. You stop being a visitor in your life. You start participating in it with your whole self. Even your sense of time may begin to change. When you walk slowly, a minute stretches, a moment deepens. You realize how much you were missing in your usual pace. You stop treating time as something to conquer and start treating it as something to inhabit. And that changes your relationship to life itself. This is not a break from meditation. It is meditation. It is not preparation for something deeper. It is depth. It is not an alternative for those who can't sit. It is a complete practice. It requires the same attention, the same honesty, the same discipline. Walking meditation teaches you that presence is not limited to the cushion. It belongs in motion. It belongs in the breath between tasks, in the pause between conversations, in the space between steps. It belongs wherever you are. And when you walk this way often enough, it begins to shift your identity. You are no longer someone trying to be mindful. You are someone who walks in awareness, who moves through the world with attention, who honors the ground with each step, not for show, not for outcome, but because this is how you meet life now, slowly, deeply, fully. The wisdom of slowness is not about pace. It is about presence. It is about refusing to rush past your own experience. It is about knowing that there is nothing you need to catch up to. There is only this moment, this step, this breath. And from there, everything unfolds. As you slow your pace and begin walking with your whole self, body, breath, and awareness, something deeper starts to unravel. The mind no longer drives every step. The body is no longer a forgotten vehicle. Everything softens, and in that softening, you come closer to your real experience. But just beneath this calm, another layer often reveals itself. A tension that doesn't come from the outside. A pressure that lingers even in silence. It's the subtle weight of needing to appear spiritual, to perform peace, to perfect your practice, to become a version of yourself that looks enlightened, even if it feels forced. This tension is quiet. It often hides behind good intentions. You want to grow, to heal, to be more conscious, but over time, the desire to be awake can quietly turn into another mask. another story the ego tells, another image to maintain. You sit in meditation, but now it has to look or feel a certain way. You practice mindfulness, but only if it makes you appear calm. You choose your words carefully, but only to sound wise. This is not spiritual practice, it's spiritual performance. And while it may fool others, it never brings peace. The spiritual ego is tricky. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers. It builds its identity around being someone who knows better. It wants to be seen as advanced. It wants to belong in the quiet spaces. It wants to be the one others turn to. But this wanting creates suffering, because it adds pressure to what should bring ease. It turns presence into performance. It turns insight into status. It turns silence into something to be admired, not inhabited. When this happens, even the most sincere practice becomes tight. You're no longer meditating to connect. You're meditating to maintain an identity. You're no longer reflecting to understand. You're reflecting to find something impressive to share. And when your attention shifts from being to appearing, your peace disappears. Letting go of spiritual perfectionism doesn't mean abandoning your path. It means removing the need to perform it. It means allowing yourself to be human within the practice, to admit when you're lost, to speak honestly about doubt, to not know all the answers, and to stop needing every experience to be profound. Perfectionism wears many faces. Sometimes it's trying to feel peaceful all the time. Sometimes it's chasing clarity with force. Sometimes it's judging yourself for not being enlightened enough. But all of it rests on one assumption, that you are not okay as you are. And that's the lie. Because the truth of practice isn't becoming flawless, it's becoming real. Real means messy sometimes. Real means distracted. Real means reactive. But it also means honest. It means showing up to practice with whatever is alive in you, without pretending, without editing, without needing the moment to be any different than it is. The most profound practices are often the simplest. A breath fully felt, a pause fully lived, a moment of presence without explanation. But the spiritual ego doesn't value simple. It wants something to prove, something to share, something to achieve. And the moment you start needing spiritual moments to look impressive, you lose their depth. This is where humility becomes the most powerful teacher. Not as self-deprecation, but as truthfulness. Humility means recognizing that you are not here to impress anyone, not even yourself. You are here to return, again and again, with no story, no gold star, no outcome to display, just presence. When humility deepens, the need to explain disappears. You no longer tell stories to show how aware you are. You no longer post insights to prove your growth. You no longer feel superior for your stillness. Instead, you learn to be quiet because the quiet itself is nourishing, not because it makes you look good. This shift is subtle but essential, because spiritual growth is not about becoming someone new. It's about unlearning the need to be someone at all. You stop reaching for a label. You stop clinging to roles. You stop needing to be the mindful one, the healer, the wise one. You just become a person, awake, flawed, learning. This is where authenticity is born, not in effort, but in release. When you stop performing, your practice becomes soft again. You return to your cushion, not to achieve a state, but to feel what is. You walk, not to be spiritual, but to inhabit your steps. You breathe, not to reach silence, but to be with breath. Even your struggles become part of the practice. You stop hiding them. You bring them into awareness. You hold space for your own contradictions. And that self-acceptance creates room for transformation, because nothing needs to be hidden anymore. Performance blocks growth, because growth requires honesty. If you're too busy being someone you're not, you can't meet what's really there. You can't release what you won't acknowledge. But when you drop the act, when you step out from behind the role, something softens. You realize you don't need to be perfect to be present. You don't need to be wise to be awake. You just need to show up. This changes your relationships too. You stop competing spiritually. You stop comparing your path to others. You no longer see yourself as above or below anyone. You just see others as mirrors, sometimes reflecting what you've seen, sometimes showing what you've missed. You relate not from hierarchy, but from humanity. And that humanity becomes sacred, because it's real. You are no longer trying to transcend being human. You are learning to be fully human, with all its contradictions, and to hold that experience with tenderness. True spiritual maturity has nothing to prove. It doesn't need attention. It doesn't need agreement. It's rooted in knowing that awakening is not about looking calm. It's about being open to life without defenses. It's about responding from presence, not reacting from ego. So you begin to ask yourself gently, is this choice coming from truth or from image? Am I sharing this because it's needed or because it feeds my identity? Am I practicing from sincerity or from pressure? These questions don't judge you. They guide you back. And as you return again and again to what's real, you begin to feel lighter. The effort to impress fades. The need to have all the answers dissolves. You feel more at home in your body, more honest in your heart. You stop trying to arrive, and you simply begin to belong to this moment, to this breath, to this life as it is. This belonging is not conditional. It doesn't depend on performance. It doesn't require perfection. It arises from the freedom of knowing that presence cannot be earned. It can only be remembered. It has always been here, waiting for you to come back without the mask. And now that return begins, not with a goal, not with an achievement, but with a breath that asks nothing, a breath that proves nothing, a breath that simply is. As the need to perform fades and the pressure to be spiritual dissolves, what remains is a quieter, more intimate space. A space where truth lives not in how things appear, but in how they feel from within. But here, in this stillness, something often arises. Not noise from the outside, not distraction from the world, but a voice from within. Quiet, sharp, familiar. It doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. It says, you aren't doing enough, that you should know better by now, that you're failing even at being mindful. This is the inner critic, and it often becomes louder when everything else becomes quiet. Self-judgment is one of the most persistent forms of suffering. It attaches itself to everything: how you speak, how you practice, how you feel. It's not always harsh. Sometimes it's subtle, disguised as motivation, dressed up as responsibility. But beneath it is always the same energy: contraction. you feel smaller after it speaks. Not because you've seen the truth, but because you've been reduced by a thought pretending to be truth. In Zen practice, this contraction is not always solved through logic. It's not argued with or fixed. Instead, it is met with something more unexpected. A koan. A paradoxical question that bypasses the thinking mind. One that short-circuits analysis. One that can't be answered in words but must be lived into. And when you bring this approach to self-judgment, something powerful begins to shift. Not through willpower, but through insight. Koans are not puzzles. They're not meant to be solved. They're meant to reveal where the mind is clinging. They show you the limits of conceptual thinking. They don't explain freedom. They point to it. And when self-judgment is strong, this is often what's needed. Not a better story, but the falling away of story altogether. When you say, "I'm not good enough," the koan doesn't say, "Yes, you are." It asks, "Who is the one that is not enough?" When you say, "I've failed again," the koan asks, "What is failing if there is no fixed self?" These questions don't offer comfort. They dissolve the very foundation of the judgment itself. Because judgment rests on identity. It assumes a self that can be defined, labeled, improved, or condemned. But when you look closely, who is being judged? Where is the self that did wrong? Is it the version of you from a year ago, from a moment ago, from a thought ago? Can you find a self that exists long enough to carry blame? This inquiry doesn't lead to nihilism, it leads to space. A kind of freedom that arises when you see that the inner critic isn't pointing to anything solid. It's reacting to a pattern, a habit, a voice from the past, a loop that's played so often you forgot you could press pause. Koans invite you to do just that, to stop trying to resolve the critic with better thinking, to instead meet it with presence. When the voice says, "You're not spiritual enough," you meet it with stillness. When it says, "You're too much," you ask, "Too much for whom?" When it says, "You're behind," you ask, "Where is the finish line?" These are not distractions, they are disruptions, intentional ones. They break the trance. They make you stop believing thoughts simply because they sound familiar. They don't replace one belief with another. They remove the need to believe or disbelieve. They show you what's left when belief drops away. This is where self-judgment begins to unravel, not through self-love slogans, but through the direct experience of emptiness. When you can't find a self to fix or blame, the urgency to criticize softens. You realize that what you've been attacking is a collection of thoughts and memories, not a permanent identity. This doesn't mean you stop taking responsibility. It means you stop punishing yourself for being human. Responsibility becomes cleaner, not rooted in shame, but in clarity. You see where you've caused harm and you make amends, not to earn worth, but to restore integrity. There's no performance in that, just honesty. The critic often speaks in absolute terms, always, never, again. These are red flags. They signal that the mind has slipped into habit. Koans interrupt that. They ask questions that make the absolute impossible. If you're always failing, then who is the one who noticed? If you've never been enough, then how are you here, practicing, listening, still seeking truth? Even when the voice is subtle, just a quick wince at a mistake or a flash of embarrassment, a koan can slip in and ask, "What was that?" Not to analyze, but to shine light, to bring curiosity instead of blame. This is how presence transforms judgment, not by force, but by replacing habit with awareness. The more you do this, the more space opens around the thoughts. They may still arise, but they lose authority. You stop taking them personally. They become echoes, not commands. You see them for what they are, old voices trying to protect you by shaming you, once useful maybe, but no longer necessary. And in this spaciousness, something new appears, not affirmation, not a better story, but rest. A rest that comes from no longer needing to defend or attack yourself. You begin to relate to yourself like you would to a stranger in pain, not with strategy, but with quiet attention. This also changes how you relate to others, because judgment of others often mirrors judgment of self. When you loosen your grip on your own flaws, you become softer toward theirs. When you stop needing to perfect your practice, you stop expecting others to get it right all the time. Compassion flows more naturally, not from effort, but from understanding. This is the deeper purpose of Zen inquiry, not to arrive at answers, but to strip away the need for them. Not to figure yourself out, but to stop turning yourself into a problem. The more you practice in this way, the less interesting the critic becomes. You see that it never had the authority it claimed. It was never you, just a sound passing through awareness. And in its absence, the body relaxes. The breath deepens. You're no longer trying to earn rest. You simply rest. You no longer try to be worthy of peace. You start from peace and let everything else arise within it. This is not about becoming perfect. It's about realizing you were never meant to be. That the idea of a perfect self was just another illusion. That freedom doesn't come from fixing every flaw, but from seeing that most flaws are concepts created by comparison and memory. Now, the next time the critic speaks, you don't react. You pause. You let the voice rise. You meet it with a question. And if no answer comes, that's okay. The silence is often the real teaching. It's in that silence that something deeper begins to grow, not self-esteem, but self-forgetting. Not identity, but presence. And in that presence, judgment has nowhere to land. It passes like a shadow across the floor, seen, not followed, not feared, just another thought, no longer the truth. As the inner critic begins to lose its grip and judgment is no longer mistaken for truth, a deeper form of honesty starts to take shape. Not a loud or defensive kind, but one that lives quietly inside your attention. You're no longer rushing to label your experience. You're listening more. You're speaking less. And when you do speak, to yourself or to others, something more important becomes clear. The way you use words is no longer just a habit. It becomes a practice, a form of inner alignment, a way to either build peace or undo it. Speech is often thought of as something that exists between people. You say something, someone hears it, you respond, they reply. But speech is also something you carry internally. The voice that speaks when no one else is around. The words you repeat to yourself in the quiet moments. This internal speech often goes unnoticed, yet it shapes how you feel, how you react, and how you understand your place in the world. Right speech in Buddhist practice is not just about avoiding harm. It's about speaking in a way that reflects awareness and intention. It's about pausing before you speak, not to be polite, but to be clear, not to be agreeable, but to be kind. When applied inwardly, right speech becomes a tool of liberation. It changes the way you narrate your life. It transforms your inner dialogue from tension to clarity, from punishment to care. What you say to yourself matters. Language is not neutral. Every phrase you repeat becomes part of the fabric of your mind. If you say, "I always mess up," that becomes a groove. If you say, "No one understands me," that becomes a lens. These words might not be spoken aloud, but they still echo inside your awareness. And over time, they shape the emotional landscape you live in. Right speech begins by noticing what kind of language lives in your head. Is it harsh? Is it sarcastic? Is it filled with assumptions about how others see you? Does it demand perfection? Is it honest? Or is it trying to keep you in line? These questions aren't meant to shame. They are invitations to pay attention to how language is shaping your reality. This is where practice begins, not with censorship, but with curiosity. You listen not to edit yourself, but to understand what habits have formed. You start to hear the tone, not just the content. Is it compassionate? Is it reactive? Is it old? Has it become automatic? Right. Speech includes 4 qualities. It is truthful, helpful, kind, and timely. Applied inwardly, this means that your inner voice does not need to flatter you or lie, but it also doesn't need to hurt you to feel true. A voice that is both honest and kind is possible. One that says, "This was hard and I see you," instead of, "You should have done better." One that says, "Let's keep trying," rather than, "You'll never change." When your inner speech changes, your nervous system begins to feel safer, because you're no longer at war with yourself. You're not waiting for criticism. You're not preparing for self-attack. You're living inside a mind that treats you like someone who matters. Not because you're always right, but because you are worthy of kindness even when you struggle. This does not make you soft, it makes you resilient. Because when your internal language is steady and kind, you recover faster from difficulty. You respond to challenges from a centered place. You don't collapse under criticism because you no longer believe the worst voice in your head. You've trained it to speak differently, and this inner change extends outward. The way you speak to others becomes clearer, less reactive. You stop using words as weapons. You stop filling silence with noise. You speak when needed, not just when you're uncomfortable. You begin to recognize that every word you offer is a seed. It can create distance or connection, confusion or clarity, harm or healing. When speech is misused, internally or externally, it creates mental conflict. You say one thing and feel another. You promise things you don't intend to keep. You agree to avoid discomfort. These small breaches may not be visible to others, but they leave a trace inside. A sense of dissonance, a fracture between who you are and how you show up. Right. Speech repairs this fracture. It invites you to say less, but mean more. To pause before you speak, not from fear, but from care. To stop using language to escape discomfort. To speak what's true and trust that the truth, when offered with presence, is enough. Even silence becomes part of right speech, because sometimes silence is what kindness looks like. Not avoidance, but restraint. Not hiding, but choosing not to say what doesn't need to be said. When your speech is grounded in awareness, you no longer fear silence. You no longer rush to fill it. you let it speak its own truth. Right speech is also deeply connected to boundaries. When your internal dialogue respects you, it becomes easier to say no with clarity. Not from guilt, not from anger, but from steadiness. You're no longer using words to keep the peace at your own expense. You're no longer agreeing just to avoid conflict. You're communicating with your whole self, your values, your truth, your presence. This integrity brings peace. Not because every conversation goes well, but because you are no longer betraying yourself with your own voice. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to believe in what you say. You feel less fragmented, because your outer words and inner truth are no longer in conflict. And this trust creates space. Space to think before reacting. Space to ask questions instead of assume. Space to hold silence without panic. Space to let others speak without needing to defend. You begin to speak less from fear and more from clarity. This shift is not sudden. It takes attention. It takes willingness to listen to the voice you've been living with, not to fight it, but to understand it, to recognize that it learned its tone from somewhere, that it tried to protect you, that it repeated what it heard, and then to slowly begin changing it, not by force, but by choosing different words again and again. The voice in your mind can become your ally, not by being perfect, but by being honest, by reminding you of your values when it would be easier to abandon them, by speaking with gentleness when the world is loud, by helping you pause when you want to rush. Right speech transforms mental conflict, not because it fixes your problems, but because it changes how you talk to yourself while facing them. It reduces the extra suffering, the guilt, the shame, the self-attack that makes difficulty harder than it needs to be. It builds a foundation from which real clarity can grow. And from that clarity, your whole way of being begins to shift. You stop seeking validation through words. You stop performing peace. You stop hiding behind cleverness or silence. You speak when it matters. You listen when it doesn't. You rest in the space between words with trust. Because you've learned that the most powerful voice is not the one that says the most. It's the one that speaks from the deepest part of you, the part that doesn't need to be right, just real. The part that doesn't need to impress, just connect. The part that knows what you say to yourself is what you live inside. And now, you live inside something softer, something steadier, something kind. As your words begin to soften and inner speech becomes a source of clarity rather than conflict, something unexpected happens. A quiet spaciousness opens. One where you're no longer defending yourself against yourself. One where silence isn't a threat and truth doesn't need embellishment. But in this space, another layer of growth calls for your attention. Even when your mind is kind and your speech is clean, there are things you still cling to. Identities, habits, beliefs about who you are and how things should be. And while they may not scream like the inner critic once did, they still limit the depth of your freedom. There is a deeper letting go that does not happen once, but again and again. A practice not of control, but of surrender. Not dramatic, but intimate. It is the daily choice to release what you've outgrown, to die, not in body, but in ego, not in spirit, but in attachment. This is the practice of micro-impermanence, letting yourself die a little each day so that something more real, more honest, more present can live in its place. Dying daily is not about disappearing, it's about releasing. You let go of the version of yourself that no longer fits. You shed the expectations that weighed you down yesterday. You watch the roles, the routines, and the labels you've picked up, some useful, some outdated, and you bow to them, then loosen your grip. It's not a rejection, it's a recognition. Nothing you identify with is permanent. And the more you pretend otherwise, the more life becomes a performance instead of a presence. This practice is subtle. You might begin with one small thing, how tightly you hold on to being right, or the way you rehearse your image in front of others, or the routine that comforts you but secretly dulls your spirit. You notice it, you pause, you ask, what would happen if I didn't cling to this today? The answer is rarely immediate. Sometimes discomfort rises, sometimes relief. Either way, space appears where contraction once lived. This is not a denial of who you are. It's a return to what you are beneath the layers. The personality you protect, the stories you retell, the patterns you repeat. These are costumes. Some serve you, some limit you. The point is not to judge them, but to see that they are not fixed, that you are not required to keep wearing them. When you die daily to who you were, you give the next version of yourself room to breathe. You don't force transformation, you allow it. Like shedding skin, it happens in layers. Sometimes you don't even notice until afterward, when you no longer feel the need to explain, defend, or achieve something you once believed defined you. This practice also reveals how much energy is spent maintaining the illusion of sameness. You wake up and unconsciously step into the same mental clothing, the beliefs, the worries, the plans. But if you were to pause and ask, what am I ready to let go of today? You might find that much of what you carry no longer serves you. Micro-impermanence invites you to look at everything with fresh eyes, to meet your thoughts, your emotions, even your habits, not as facts, but as passing forms. Nothing you feel today is guaranteed tomorrow. No belief is immune to evolution. No story is eternal. When you truly feel this, not just know it, but embody it, something within softens. The need to grip fades. You stop clinging to moments for security. You start experiencing them for what they are, brief, beautiful, and enough. This doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean rejecting all structure. It means becoming more intimate with change, more willing to step into uncertainty, more trusting that your worth isn't tied to consistency. It means allowing your identity to breathe, to grow, to fall apart when needed, and to rebuild itself from presence, not fear. Daily dying is also a practice of humility. It reminds you that you are not the same person you were yesterday, and neither is anyone else. It keeps you from trapping others in old stories, from expecting them to be what they were, from reacting to their past instead of meeting them in the now. This softens relationships. It breaks the cycle of resentment. You stop repeating conversations that ended long ago. You stop expecting people to behave according to the role you assigned them. When you live this way, forgiveness becomes easier. Not because nothing matters, but because you no longer expect permanence from impermanent beings. You no longer demand that people live up to who they were. You meet them with the same space you give yourself, a space that allows for change, a space that welcomes the unknown. Symbolically dying each day also means looking at your attachments with honest curiosity. What ideas about success are you holding on to? What fears shape your decisions? What routines have become cages? You don't need to burn your life down. You simply need to notice what you've become fused with and practice loosening your grip. This loosening is not passive. It requires attention. It means noticing the moment you reach for control, the moment you fall into a narrative, the moment you define yourself by pain or pride, and instead of feeding it, you pause, you breathe, you let it die, not because it's wrong, but because it's not needed anymore. And from that pause, something else arises, a deeper kind of self, one not built on repetition, but on presence, one that doesn't need to be right or healed or finished, one that just is, open, aware, responsive. This self doesn't cling to yesterday's version of peace. It meets what's here today. It's not afraid to be new. It's not ashamed to change. It finds freedom in impermanence, not fear. It's not the kind of self you can define. It's the part of you that remains after every layer has been allowed to fall away. In many traditions, the idea of dying before you die is a teaching about freedom. It means practicing the art of letting go now so that death is not a shock, but a continuation. If you can die daily to your attachments, your opinions, your fears, then real death is not something foreign. It is just another form of release. This practice, lived sincerely, also brings clarity. You stop confusing attachment for love. You stop confusing routine for safety. You begin to live with more presence and less effort. You stop needing to prove who you are. You become interested in what remains when proving is no longer needed. And what remains is not emptiness in a hollow sense. It's space, creative, alive, awake. The space to be who you are without being trapped in who you were. The space to meet life without armor. The space to feel everything fully and release it fully. Even your habits begin to change, not by force, but by attention. You catch yourself going through motions. You pause and ask, is this alive for me, or am I just doing it because I always have? And if it's no longer alive, you let it go. That act alone is a form of dying, a gentle death of routine, a soft rebirth into presence. You also stop fearing the unknown, because every day becomes a rehearsal in trust. You trust that letting go will not erase you. You trust that change will not destroy your center. You trust that something new will rise when you stop holding on to the old. Dying daily is not a dramatic practice. It's quiet. It's made of moments. A breath you don't rush, a pause you don't fill, a truth you don't cover, an identity you don't defend. It is not about detaching from life. It is about stepping into it more fully, because you're no longer weighed down by what you think it should be. And now, from this place of soft release, something new becomes possible, not more effort, not more control, but more space, more honesty, more trust in what happens when nothing is held too tightly. This is not the end of something. It is the beginning of a new rhythm, one that flows with change, one that honors endings without fear, one that knows the deepest kind of peace comes not from holding on, but from letting go. A little more, every day. And now, as the breath slows and the mind softens, let everything you've heard tonight settle not just into memory, but into your being. You've traveled through silence, through slowness, through letting go. You've stepped away from comparison, ego, and craving. You've sat with truth, touched stillness, and released identities you never needed to carry. You've forgiven. You've listened. You've remembered that peace doesn't come from becoming someone else. It comes from fully being who you already are, without clinging, without performing, without fear. Each teaching, from the wisdom of impermanence to the power of right speech, isn't just something to know. It's something to return to. In every breath, in every moment, in every step. So tonight, let yourself rest, not because you've reached the end, but because you've remembered the beginning. Peace was never far. It was simply waiting for your attention. If any part of these lessons touched you, even in a small way, I'd love to hear which one. Leave a comment below with the words, "Peace is a practice," so I know you were with me until the end. Share what stood out or what you're letting go of tonight. And if you want to keep walking this path together, one breath, one step, one quiet moment at a time, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell. More teachings are waiting, and you're always welcome here. Now rest. You've remembered enough for today.